Pretty sure.
Hey everybody, how's it going? We are live here once again. It's that time of month, Matt.
Yep. Hey, everybody. Getting ready to talk about this book.
This book.
I'm not going to
What
say what it is
is
yet. It's a
my?
secret.
It's not like it's in the title or
Not
anything.
like it's on the YouTube page in several places.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Oh, that's is that?
I'm
Are
not
you?
actually hearing us. Oh, there we are. Okay. There's just more of a delay than usual. Okay.
Yeah. Well, now you've started an echo because I
Yeah.
heard I heard that.
Not my fault.
Wait, is that coming from mine?
It
I think it
must
is
be.
coming from mine. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
Fixed that.
Got all the kinks.
Oh, you were cutting in and out a little bit there.
Oh.
Okay, you're just doing that on purpose. How's everybody doing today? Are there people in here yet? People are
It's
filing in slowly.
ching.
Hmm?
So there are 10 people.
10 people. Hey, people, do I have the right chat open? Or is
I'm
just no
seeing
one said
this. So,
anything yet?
yeah.
Are people talking?
No.
Okay.
Interesting.
Are you okay?
Yeah. It's just you can select top chat or live chat. Top chat
What?
filters spam, apparently.
Oh, I want live chat.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, Kyrgyzstan, how's it going? We are going to get started here in a couple minutes. Just like putting all our ducks in a row and all that nonsense. Hey, Arena, how's it going? I did it again, Matt. I
Okay.
drank all my water before we even started.
Oh, yeah, I don't have any water. I forgot that completely.
Wow, man. Wow.
It's too late now. It's not like we can walk away from our computers for a few
It's
seconds.
it's impossible to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Flavored Owl. Hey, Steven. Hey, David.
Hey, David. Hey,
Are
Steven.
we are we ready, Matt? Are you ready? I guess is what I should ask.
I think so. I didn't need to do anything else, right?
Nope.
I'm ready.
Okay. Let me check the poll one more time before. I think I got this is the tightest poll for next month's
If there's,
book I've seen.
if there's not a winner, then you just cast the tie-breaking vote and don't bother telling me what.
See, the problem is I already like put the winning book in the slides, so if I have to change it last minute, I hope I don't. Let's see. I don't. Okay, good. Good. The poll is locked. We're ready to go. I am pressing record on my recording device.
Two.
Okay. All right, guys. We're going to get started here right now. Let's go in 5, 4, 3, 2,
One.
1.
Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, and I am adjudicating this whole thing.
And my name is Scott Daly, and I am just a lowly, insignificant pawn.
hmm And if you are joining us here for the first time, welcome. Here's a quick primer on how this thing works. Each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all the supporters on Patreon, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
That's right. We meet up on the last Friday of every month, and then we chat about the book that was chosen. We pull slides of important or interesting moments and dive deep into this book for a couple of hours. For those of you in the chat right now, feel free to make comments and ask questions as we go. We want this thing to be an interactive discussion. That's kind of the whole point of it. So, talk to us. And we've
Yeah.
got a bunch of people in chat already. We've got Kyrgyzstan, Arena, Flavored Owl, Steven, David, Sammy. Probably some more people that are just being shy. Hello, all of you. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah. Welcome, and I look forward to this discussion.
All right, Matt, tell us, what is this month's book?
This month's book is Iain M. Banks' The Player of Games. It's book 2 in Banks's culture series, but everyone told us we didn't really need to read book 1, or we didn't need to read the books in order anyway.
Yeah.
That's been pretty clearly established. So from Goodreads, the summary for the book goes: the culture, a humanoid slash machine symbiotic society, has thrown up many great game players. One of the best is Jerno Morat Gurgeh, player of games, master of every board, computer, and strategy. Bored with success, Gurgeh travels to the Empire of Azad, cruel and incredibly wealthy, to try their fabulous game, a game so complex, so like life itself, that the winner becomes emperor. Mocked, blackmailed, almost murdered, Gurgeh accepts the game and with it the challenge of his life, and very possibly his death.
Well, that summary makes the book sound very interesting, but I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, I think it places the emphasis on the wrong parts of the story, frankly. But
I agree.
I
I
guess
agree.
that stuff does kind of happen though. So
Yeah, yeah. These summaries are usually written by a marketing team and not the author of the book themselves, so
mhm.
that makes sense. All right, so let's talk about this book before we dive into our slides. Let's talk about it generally. Everyone out there in the chat, let us know if you had read this book before this book club, or if this was your first time reading it, and let us know what you thought overall of the book, either way. And while you're doing that, Matt, had you read this book before, and
I
what did you think?
I had not. I had not read any culture novels, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I actually enjoyed it enough that I read this book pretty much at the start of the month, and then I went and I read another culture novel. So I have a little bit more flavor on the culture actually, that I might be able to add into the discussion. So I think for me it's a big sales pitch when I go read another book in a series, because we've read several books that were in series in this book club, and I very rarely read subsequent books because I am very rarely that like bought in that I'm like gonna go grab the sequel. So yeah, that was my impression. How about you?
Yeah, I remember you at the very beginning of the month saying, I accidentally finished the book already and I started another one. And I was like, oh, I'm excited then. Yeah, I had never read any of the books in this series either. I, I I had heard of Banks and I had heard of the culture books as like a thing on some list somewhere I needed to read, right? But I had never actually gone out and done it. And that's kind of why I was really excited for book club, because this serves as a way of making me go out and read the books I've been talking about reading. That's kind of what the last quarter of this book club's been for me. It's been all these books that I've been meaning to read for a very long time and just hadn't gotten around to yet. And I really, really enjoyed this book. It is, I said this to you before, but it is a very Matt book. This is a book kind of diving into a lot of very philosophical and interesting uh, ideas. And I think I said this about Dune last month too. And this is like a book where I can tell Matt's gonna love this. Like if you hadn't told me already you would love it, I would have been like, yes, this is right up your alley. Not to say that I didn't like it. Like I liked it a lot too, but it's just the kind of thing that you and I have conversations about a lot was present throughout this book.
Yeah, yeah, I had relatively few complaints actually. Like well, I think we'll probably get into it eventually, but I have almost nothing negative to say about this book, which is something.
Great, yeah. Arena Venera in the chat says that they thought it started out super slow, but they liked it by the end. I kind of agree with that in that I think we spend a lot of time, like the book's broken into three sections, right? And the first section is you spend a lot of time in culture on the orbital that Gurgeh lives on, and that's a not insignificant portion of the book, right? To get him finally to the Empire to like start the main conflict of the story. It takes a while. I think it does that for a very specific reason, and we'll probably get into that as we go through. But I do agree, it's like there were moments where I was like, when's the book gonna like go? Like
Yeah,
when's the inciting incident going to incite?
yeah, yeah. Since Arena said that, I guess I'll mention like the thing I was going to complain about. The thing I was going to complain about is actually just the pacing. Like there are a few
Yeah,
places where like it begins a little bit slowly and then it drags in a couple of places.
yeah,
Like I'm thinking about part of the period of time when he's on the other planet, and he's like going to these illicit parties with like the mercenary guy, and I just didn't care about anything that was happening.
yeah,
It was a
yeah.
relatively short stretch of the book, so like ultimately it's a minor complaint really, but it's just like there were a few times when I just didn't. I was just like, okay, I'm a little bit bored.
Hmm.
That's kind of the worst I'll say about it though. Sammy says they also love the book. They love how much time they spend setting up the game without really explaining how it's played. But yeah, I love that too. I think we'll talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Siergrau in the Discord chat says they read it several years ago. That's cool. Did you read it again for the book club, or are you just going off memory?
So we'll hear the answer to that in 8 minutes.
Yeah. God, I hate this. I hate this lag.
Yeah.
There's a way you can turn on the stream to like do more instant response, and I'm afraid it'll just, with my dubious YouTube connection, I'm afraid it'll just make everything like buffery and
Yeah.
ruin it. So, but all right. Well, Sirigraph says no, he didn't get to reread it again. Well, hopefully you remember enough of it, or we at least jog your memory of it as we go through the story. Speaking of the story, let's start.
So the first slide is the first lines of the book. Here we establish the narrative voice, though he's being a bit coy as to who he is, this storyteller and narrator. We also basically tell the entire story. It starts with a battle that is not a battle and ends with a game that is not a game. And then we cut to the story proper. And it's interesting because the writing of this first section almost tricks us, even though we've been warned. And it begins, "This is the story of a man who went far away for a long time just to play a game. The man is a game player called Gurgeh. The story starts with a battle that is not a battle and ends with a game that is not a game. Me? I'll tell you about me later. This is how the story begins." Dust drifted with each footstep. He limped across the desert, following the suited figure in front. The gun was quiet in his hands. They must be nearly there. The noise of distant surf boomed through the helmet sound field. They were approaching a tall dune, from which they ought to be able to see the coast. Somehow he had survived. He had not expected to. It was bright and hot and dry outside, but inside the suit he was shielded from the sun and the baking air, cosseted and cool. One edge of the helmet visor was dark, where it had taken a hit, and the right leg flexed awkwardly, also damaged, making him limp, but otherwise he'd been lucky. The last time they'd been attacked had been a kilometer back, and now they were nearly out of range. So
So
it seems like he's in a battle, but it's actually a game.
well, and that's what I love about it. Like the start of this, we dive into this, even though the narrator has just told us this is a battle that's not a battle. Like the writing here is very like specifically focused to make you think this is a very serious situation. There's dust, there's a desert, he's limping, he's holding a gun, he didn't expect to survive, and your brain hears survive and immediately goes to live, not like survive to this point in the game. It's bright and hot outside, like he's wearing this battle armor, and it's like it's setting you up for this, like this is a guy who's at war, who's fighting someone, and it's totally throwing you a curveball because not long after this moment is revealed that they were just playing a game. Not only a game, but a game that our narrator thinks, or not our narrator, sorry, our main character thinks is childish and stupid.
Yeah. It was a very interesting choice of how to start the story, I thought. And to be intentionally confusing like that, and also like it gives you an interesting impression of Gurgeh because we had that discussion a while back about unlikable protagonists, and I don't actually think Gurgeh is unlikable, but I didn't like him in the beginning of the story. Like he's just sort of like aloof and superior, and thinks he's better than everyone, and like it takes him a while for you to start liking him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the reason for that is kind of because he is so different from the rest of the culture. So, like when you see him mixed in with this group of people, he comes off as so different from them that it rubs you the wrong way. And I think that's design. Like I think you're supposed to not really like him at the early parts of this story.
Yeah.
Because he's so dismissive to everyone. He doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about anything. Like he's part of the society, but he doesn't really live in the society. He has one singular focus.
Yeah, he's basically really bad at being a member of the culture because
Yeah.
everyone who's in the culture, like it's sort of designed for hedonism. It's just like we've figured out every possible way for you to maximally enjoy yourself and just go ahead and do that until you get tired of being alive.
Yeah.
And he is a rare person who like actually wants to master skills and improve himself, and he becomes obsessed about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, these are the qualities that make him actually, the person that they want to select for this mission, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to go into that in a little bit, but the one part of that about that me that sticks out about that to me is when he's talking about how much he loves to win. That it's not just about like I forget who he's talking to, but he's like, no, it's just the act of playing the game that's important. And he's like, no, not to me. I love winning. I love the experience of being better at someone else
Yeah.
than this. And that is so kind of antithetical to everything that the culture is. Yeah, it really puts him at odds with everyone around him, which, yeah, I mean, is not by design, but it's like the reason why he's the good one that goes on this mission.
Yeah. Uh, it's funny. Kyrgyzstan mentions that like perhaps Gurgeh's disdain comes from the fact that this is more of an athletic and maybe
Yeah.
not a mental game.
Yeah, yeah. He seems like completely. Yeah, I mean, he seems like kind of like a pretentious like academic that just has no time for anything that's not this one thing, right?
Yeah, right.
All right. Anything else you want to say about this? I guess we should like the kind of structure of this book is it's in three different parts, and each part starts with our narrator kind of breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to us, and that's something that continues throughout the book. So this. There's a very small setup here, and it carries through to the very end of the book.
Yeah.
All right. So this next slide, we learn a little bit more about culture through the use of drugs, and we learn a little bit more about Gurgeh through which drugs he does and doesn't use. The book, like we were talking about before, is already like using these drugs to kind of distance him from the rest of culture. The rush of shard blue surrounded him, invaded him. The fragrance on the warm night air, spilling from a line of open doors behind him, carried on the tide of noise that people made, became like separate strands of air, fibers unraveling from a rope, each with its own distinct color and presence. The fiber became like packets of soil, something to be rubbed between his fingers, absorbed, identified. There, that red-black scent of roasted meat, blood quickening, salvatory, tempting and vaguely disagreeable at the same time as separate parts of his brain assessed the odor. The animal root smelled fuel, protein-rich food. The midbrain trunk registered dead, incinerated cells, while the canopy of the forebrain ignored both signals because it knew his belly was full and the roasted meat cultivated. He could detect the sea, too, a brine smell from 10 or more kilometers away over the plain and the shallow downs, another threaded connection like the and web of rivers and canals that linked the dark lake to the restless flowing ocean beyond the fragrant grasslands and scented forests. Sharp blue was a game player secretion, a product of standard genofixed culture glands sitting on Gurgeg's lower skull beneath an ancient animal-evolved lower reaches of his brain. The panoply of internal manufactured drugs the vast majority of culture individuals were capable of choosing from comprised up to 300 different compounds of varying degrees of popularity and sophistication. Sharp blue was one of the least used because it brought no direct pleasure and required considerable concentration to produce. But it was good for games. What seemed complicated became simple. What appeared insoluble became soluble. What had been unknown became obvious. A utility drug, an abstract modifier, not a sensory enhancer or sexual stimulate or physiological booster. And he didn't need it. So again, yeah, this is like we learn kind of, this is a big thing about culture is these glands that they have that can produce any drug they want. Like you said, it's hedonistic. Like any way they want to feel, anything that they want to do, they can just do it, and they have these glands that produce it for it. But not Gurgeh. I mean, not that he doesn't use it, but he like has a purpose behind each of it.
Yeah, like he's at this party basically, and he's just such a like dour person. He's not really enjoying the party. Everyone else is having a great time and being again completely hedonistic, and like he's basically just there. Is maybe I'm thinking of maybe this is a different part of the story that I'm thinking of, but like um actually no, this is a different part of the story that I'm thinking of. I don't remember why he's at this party actually, but I'm pretty
He's
sure
just
that
playing a guy. Like he's just playing someone in a game, and
yeah,
he's so superior to the person. I mean, that's what the "he didn't need it" line at the end here is. He's taken this secretion to make him better at the game, but he's realized quickly in the game that he didn't even need to bother
yeah.
because it's the guy is so beneath him.
And I think the point of that, like the reason why this is on page 6 is we're establishing that he's bored, right? He is um he's not challenged by the culture
Right,
right now.
right.
He's becoming rather like disaffected actually. And we see that in a lot of ways. And like we see him push against like the propriety a little bit and start to break the rules later on in the story because he is he's not being challenged, and so like that's there's the blackmail element that comes in, but I think that the fact that he's just bored has more to do with the reason why he goes on this journey rather than the blackmail is what pushes him, but it's the boredom that um, kind of ultimately justifies it.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this to me is like everyone that he considers his friend in this story is also kind of varying levels of bored, right? It's just the ways they deal with that boredom are different than his. Like, Ye wants to design different kinds of plates, and that's what she wants to do, and she eventually just goes and does that. The one person switches genders and then has another baby. The professor is just working on their just something they've been researching for years. Like everyone seems bored, but they have outlets for that boredom that at least satisfy them in some way. But it just none of that seems enough to our main character.
Yeah, you could argue that it's because he's the best that he's bored. Like if he weren't
Sure, yeah,
if he had to work harder to be the best, then or if he just weren't the best, and he was trying to be the best, then that would be then he would have some meaning. But it's lonely at the top.
yeah. And also, like, I wonder, like, they call him the best. Everyone kind of knows he's the best, but it's almost as if like that's cool and all. But in this culture, that doesn't matter as much,
Yeah,
right? Like it's a post scarcity society, so like you can commit your whole life to just playing games, and that's fine. But like it doesn't like it is something that occupies his time, and he has a level of respect because of it. But it's not like he's a celebrity.
yeah,
I mean, he
yeah.
kind of is.
He kind of is. I mean, it's. I think it's quite comparable to like the way we view like the world champion chess master, where like a lot of people know who it is, and like you would really enjoy playing a game against them, even though you know that you're going to get crushed, just because then you could say that you did it.
Right.
Or if you took a piece off of them, then you could brag about that for your whole life. So he's like a minor celebrity, but like he takes it so seriously, and to everyone else, it's clearly just games.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like everyone else like games are even the people that are really good at games and like write papers like he does and like have committed their lives to it. It still seems like it's something they just do like in between all the other fun they're having. Whereas him, it's just that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Any other comments on that slide?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So on the next slide, we meet Mawhrin-Skel, the drone, and learn about his deal. Mawhrin-Skel had been designed as a special circumstances drone for the culture's contact section, effectively a military machine with a variety of sophisticated, hardened sensory and weapons systems, which would have been quite unnecessary and useless on the majority of drones. As with all sentient culture constructs, its precise character had not been fully mapped out before its construction, but allowed to develop as the drone's mind was put together. The culture regarded this unpredictable factor in its production of conscious machines as the price to be paid for individuality, but the result was that not every drone so brought into being was entirely suitable for the tasks it had been initially designed for. Mawhrin-Skel was one such rogue drone. Its personality, it had been decided, wasn't right for contact, not even right for special circumstances. It was unstable, belligerent, and insensitive. And those were only the grounds it had chosen to tell people it had failed on. It had been given the choice of radical personality alteration, in which it would have had little or no say in its own eventual character, or a life outside contact, with its personality and sensory systems removed to bring it down to something nearer the level of a standard drone. It had bitterly chosen the latter, and it had made its way to Chiark Orbital, where it hoped it might fit in.
So that's Mawhrin-Skel, a pretty important character to this book. The thing I really wanted to talk to you, the thing that jumped out to me very earlier in this story is this idea. First of all, we have these drones, and in this society, like drone and human are treated basically the same, right? Like they have equal rights. Like there's not any kind of slave servant kind of arrangement here, or not seemingly, right?
Yeah.
And the thing I noticed, especially through Mawhrin-Skel, like the thing that acts the most like traditionally in the reader sense human, is this guy.
Yeah.
Is this like he lists himself as unstable, belligerent, and insensitive, and he is absolutely that. Like we have all our characters, and all our like our main character is kind of reserved as a person. He doesn't like show that much emotion, or it's rare when he does. I mean, he does eventually, but it just struck me so quickly, like the most like person feeling character that I had met in the story so far was the one that wasn't a person, and I think that's intentional.
Yeah, right. I think that's really interesting. I mean, there's two things I guess that I wanted to say about that idea. Like one of them is that, all of the humans are constantly like glanding drugs and basically doing other things to make themselves less human. Like in later books, you meet human characters who've modified themselves even more than that, like special circumstances people who have all kinds of augmentations. But
Yeah,
like the drones are like obviously human level by choice because like they could enhance themselves. It would be easy, but they choose not to. They want to remain at this level, and
yeah,
that's very interesting, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why they feel so kind of relatable.
yeah. I think that's absolutely right. It's that like the humans are so messing with their biology that they act less human,
Yeah.
and the robots are like choosing to be human.
The other thing about
Or
Mawhrin-Skel though is that he's not actually like everything he does in the first part of the story is in some sense an act, right?
right, right. Well, and I think the second part too. Like I think I don't know
Yeah.
if we ever really get to meet his personality because they're both each time his personalities are serving a purpose.
Yeah, right, right. So, but and that that cuts against the idea that he's very human because it's like, well, no, he's whatever he needs to be to get what he
That's true.
wants.
Yeah.
But I feel I feel your meaning as to like he behaves in a way that is like the most dramatic and is what drives the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like I mean I think part of this is like that you have that reaction because you don't realize till like the very very end of the book that that character was just an act, right? So
Yeah.
like when you're designing a book and you're trying to get off certain feelings to the people that are reading, like you think of him as more human throughout the entire story, and maybe that's like it's intentionally like manipulating you in that regard. I mean, that's kind of what this whole book is, manipulating our main character and manipulating us at the same time. Like it's everything, every event that happens in this is things moving in a certain way to make characters and readers feel a certain way.
Yeah, and this is one statement that I can make kind of generally about the culture novels is that and this is not even my original like statement, and I don't even know if I want to call it a complaint, but the idea that you have these like ship minds and habitat minds who are basically super AIs who are so much smarter than people that you just have to assume that everything that people are doing is part of their design. Like they're like they apparently live by norms where they try not to be like the manipulators of the humans, but like I don't see how that could possibly work. So I'm just forced to assume in all of the culture novels that the AIs are actually the ones who are constructing the plot and moving the humans around like chess pieces.
Yeah.
And
I
I
mean,
think, yeah, yeah,
I think you're right, and I think that we have some slides that specifically indicate you're right a little bit later. But yeah, I mean, I think the illusion of culture is the illusion of freedom, right? Is that people can do whatever they want in this society, and the way culture gets away with that is that these great, huge, brilliant AIs just like push you towards things that they want you to do. Like it's like I think the line at the very end of the book is like, I was told or was asked to keep up pretenses. Like it's just like the idea that you can do whatever you want is just an illusion in this story. Like it's not. It's you. This society is kind of controlled, not the same way as the Empire, but just kind of more sneakily than the Empire.
yeah, yeah. I think we'll get into the similarities and differences maybe later on in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, we gotta have our guy cheat, or kind of cheat,
Kind of.
and then actually cheat. Yeah, so Gurgeh is heading on a train to go play a young game champion, and there's this awkward moment where he's looking for game pieces and gets caught cheating, quote unquote, or the guy he's playing against assumes he's cheating. Gurgeh started lifting bits and pieces up, humming to himself and looking for the flat wafer. He heard a sudden intake of breath, then what sounded like a rather embarrassed cough just behind him. He turned round to see Mr. Dreltram behind him, looking oddly awkward. Gurgeh frowned as Mr. Dreltrum just returned from the bathroom, his eyes wide with the mixture of drugs he was glanding, and followed by a tray bearing drinks, sat down again, staring at Gurgeh's hands. It was only then, as the tray set the glasses on the table, that Gurgeh realized the cards he happened to be holding, which he had lifted up to look for his hidden piece wafer, were Mr. Dreltrum's remaining mine cards. Gurgeh looked at them. They were still face down. He hadn't seen where the mines were, and understood what Mr. Dreltrum had been thinking. He put the cards back where he'd found them. I'm very sorry, he laughed. I was looking for my hidden piece. He saw it, even as he spoke the words. The circular wafer was lying uncovered, almost right in front of him on the table. Ah, he said, and only then he felt the blood rising to his face. Here it is. Couldn't see it for looking at it. He laughed again, and as he did so, felt a strange, clutching sensation coursing through him, seeming to squeeze his guts into something between terror and ecstasy. He had never experienced anything like it. The closest any sensation had ever come, he thought suddenly, clearly, had been when he was still a boy, and he'd experienced his first orgasm at the hands of a girl a few years older than him. Crude, purely human, basic, like a single instrument picking out a simple theme and a note at a time, compared to the drug-gland-boosted symphonies sex would later become. That first time had nevertheless been one of his most memorable experiences, not just because it was then novel, but because it seemed to open up a whole new fascinating world, an entirely different type of sensation of being. So he gets caught, quote-unquote, cheating, and compares it to the first time he had an orgasm. That's how shocking this new feeling is. That's how surprising this feeling of shame, of something he's just never felt before. And this is kind of our instigating event, right? Everything that happens in the story leads from this one time where he had this one feeling, because it's because he had this feeling that he's convinced to actually cheat later.
Yeah, and I've been trying to work out, like, did this event, like the fact that he didn't see the card lying around the table, for example, is this orchestrated by special circumstances to like set up the psychological rope-a-dope that leads to him ending up going on the trip, or is this just a narrative thing that happens and they play off of the state that he's in? Like, I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I hadn't thought of that possibility until you told me that a couple days ago. And I mean, I think it absolutely could be. Like, there is the AI that we see at the end of the book is like the size of that token, right? And then we get a specific indication at the very, very end of the book that a hole in the shell of Marwyn was just exactly the size of that token, which could indicate those two different things. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's very possible. It's very possible. Or it's just as believable to say this random event happened and the AI hive mind, being what it is, like capitalizes on immediately and knows exactly how to press on that experience to push him to where they want him to go.
Yeah. In any case, it's as you say, a very important plot event. And says a lot about him as a character.
Yeah, I love his reaction to this. Like, he wasn't even cheating. Yeah. And then he's accused of this, and then has this eye-opening experience. And then I think it's almost as important that he loses this game by dumb luck after this. So he has this life-changing experience where he's like, someone thinks he was actually cheating in this game, which I think they mention in the story that like they have people to like protect the sanctity of the game, but that's more of like a tradition because nobody cheats. Because again, this is a society that doesn't value winning as much. Like, it's not as important as just playing. So like nobody cheats at this game, really. It's just not something people do.
Right. Yeah. So basically the point of all of this is like he's been bored for so long, and now he finds a new form of excitement through like transgressing against the norms of the society.
Yeah.
Which you can kind of see how that would lead to what happens moving forward.
Yeah.
All right. Are we done with this slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So this next slide has some interesting structural writing to it. There are actually two conversations going on here, intermixed with each other.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about this. I guess read the slide first, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, I'll do my best because I can't really remember who was speaking.
Good luck.
Well, she said, looking at Gurgeh as though he'd only just appeared. How are you, Journo? Well enough. He watched Mawhrin-Skel maneuver itself beside All's Hap, floating over the table beside her plate, fields all formal blue and green friendliness. Good evening, he heard the drone say in its most avuncular voice. The girl brought her head up to look at the machine, and Gurgeh listened to their conversation at the same time as he and Barulel talked. Hello. Well enough to play a game of Stricken? Mawhrin-Skel's the name. All's Hap, am I right? I think so, Professor. Are you well enough to invigilate? Yes, how do you do? Fuck me, no. Drunk as a desert spring. Have to get somebody else. Suppose I would come down in time, but nah. Oh, shake fields with me, eh? That's very sweet of you. So few people bother. How nice to meet you. We've all heard so much. How about the young lady herself? Oh dear. What? What's wrong? Have I said something wrong? Is she ready to play? No, it's just, play what? Ah, you're shy. You needn't be. Nobody'll force you to play. Least of all Gurgeh, believe me. The game, Buralal. Well, what do you mean now? So I'll comment that I listened to the audiobook, which probably kept all of the voices straight, and it didn't even occur to me that this would be confusing as hell for someone reading it in text.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the questions I wanted to have for you is how they handled this as an audiobook. This so this fascinated me, right? Like this decision to structurally do this conversation like this. It is not easy to read, and I had to go back and read it a few times before I like was able to follow everything that was going on. But I'm really fascinated by the decision to do this.
Yeah.
And like why Banks like he didn't have to do it this way, but he specifically decided to structure this whole conversation like this. So I was wondering like what your theory was on why Banks said this is what I'm going to do in this scene.
You know, my first thought is that he's putting you in the state of mind of Gurgeh, where he's torn between different conversations because there are different things that he's interested in going on in different ways, and it's just putting you into his state of mind. Because like normally you would just like pay attention to the person you're talking to, but he like can't do that um because I don't know why exactly. I don't know why exactly. I don't have a really good answer. That's just all I can kind of think of.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me. Like, if you look how it's structured, it's like the starting lines of each of the starting words of each of the lines are like opposite of each other. Like look at this. Like, I think so, Professor. Are you well enough to invigilate? Yes. How do you do? And it's like it almost like it almost serves to even more confuse it because
Yeah.
like they're opposing. Like she's saying yes to Mawhrin-Skel, but actually the professor's answer is no, and it's just like that kind of continues throughout it because then we have this whole conversation at the end where like Ol's Hap is right there talking, and they're talking about is she ready to play? Like it's so funny that these two conversations are going on at the same time. Gurgeh is listening to both of them, but not talking to her. Like he's like talking to someone else. Like is she ready to play? She's having a conversation right there, like right next to you that you admitted you are listening in on.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, just to get everyone on the same page here, like this is the point where he actually really wants to play this game with her because he's heard that she's this prodigy of the game, and
Mm-hmm.
and he thinks it'll actually be a challenge, but like he has a weird ego thing going on where he can't just walk up to her and be like, I want to play with you, like
Yeah.
and because she's like really young and it would be kind of embarrassing for him, but also he totally wants to.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's doing this elaborate thing, as you say, where he's kind of like trying to maneuver himself into playing the game with her, but he is trying not to seem like that's what he's doing.
Yeah. And I think when you look at it, knowing what Mawhrin-Skel is doing, I think you have to assume that he's aware that Gurgeh is listening in on this conversation, and so part of his responses are like pushing and prodding at him as well. Like this whole line, you needn't you're shy, you needn't be. Nobody will force you to play, least of all Gurgeh, believe me.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of like pushing and prodding at him to kind of like I think that's very clever, and I think that's part of why it's mixed in here like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like the drone, the voice actor for the drone, but the voice actor it's the same voice actor for everything, but the voice he does for Mawhrin-Skel is just absolutely delightful, and like it comes across in the text too that he's he's needling Gurgeh even though he's talking to the girl.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
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 Kyrgyzstan says that they confess, I read it once, was confused, gave it up as a loss, and kept going. I don't blame you. If I knew, if like I didn't know, like if I wasn't doing this for book club and didn't have to talk intelligently about this book for 2 hours, I probably would have done the same because this is a mess. And that gets into like this whole idea, like, you know, the decision to structure things like this, right? Like it has a very specific purpose. I think we've kind of cracked into it. Steven here says Gurgeh is dialed into this other conversation because he's invested in whether he can beat her. And that's absolutely true. And I think the fact that we're mixing these conversations so confusingly like this lends to that confusion. Like I think Banks wants you to be confused here because your main character is not really engaged in his conversation. So you can't follow it. And he's like, by dividing his time, he's not really picking up on any of the conversations. And when you read it through the first time, that's exactly what you're doing too. But I wonder, like, I think a lot of people that read this probably just have the same experience that Kyrgyzstan did, which is just like, I'm confused. I'm just gonna move on with the story. And so is this a good, you know, structural technique if it turns people off like that?
Well, so here's the thing. When you actually look at it, it's just alternating. It's strictly alternating.
Right.
So it's easy to decode if you figure that out. But it took me a couple like minutes of staring at it and having this conversation to figure that out, which was so obvious. And apparently this is the same for other people too. So it's very likely that he just thought like, oh, it's going to be obvious that I'm alternating between the conversation between Mawhrin-Skel and Olshap and the conversation between Gurgeh and I guess the professor.
Yeah.
And it's not clear until you've like read it and then you look over it and it's like, no, that doesn't work. I do not like it actually.
Yeah.
Works
And
great in an audiobook though.
it's funny because we just a couple weeks ago had the same conversation about a chapter in Ward, where it's like, okay, if something's confusing to you on first read that you don't understand it, but on a second read you look back and say, wow, that was actually brilliant. Is it still a good decision to do? And I think the decision we made in that conversation was, I don't know. And I think this is another one of those moments where I'm like, I don't know. Like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Well, I don't think it would have killed him to write a handful of times throughout these sentences who is speaking.
True.
Like you can still have the intermixed, confusing conversations and just denote who is speaking.
But he really wants you to be confused.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with no. I'm not gonna be using this technique in my storytelling.
It also doesn't help that Burlal is drunk and therefore has no idea what's going on. Like that just adds to the confusion. Like, is she ready to play? Play what?
Yeah.
The game we're here to play.
Yeah.
What do you mean now? Play it now? And he's like, so you got a drunk guy talking to a guy that's listening to another conversation, talking to a girl that's super shy and really awkward in this whole thing, talking to a drone that's suddenly like subtly trying to manipulate a guy. So it's just a total mess.
Well, I love a lot about the surrounding like context of the scene though. This idea that like he's almost desperate to play against her, but like this is basically shameful for a culture citizen to admit because of like the way their values are.
Right.
So like he's super serious about it, but he's just trying to play it off like, oh, we just happen to be at the same place, so I guess I'll play you, you know. But
yeah,
it's very. I just love how that is all conveyed.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think as like a writing exercise, I appreciate this, but I completely agree with you that like in practice, it's probably not something people should commonly do in their stories.
Yeah.
But it led us to this conversation, and I enjoyed this conversation. So thanks, Iain.
Yeah.
All right, so next what happens is our friendly droid Mawhrin-Skel convinces Gurgeh to cheat. Not to win. He's won the game against this girl, but just to try to get like the perfect score. The perfect score has never been achieved in this game, and he wants it. Which again is not something very, you know, culture-like, right? Like you would assume that is not something that most people would want to strive for, especially not enough to cheat to do it. But the droid knows how to push him just enough to convince him to cheat, and then immediately blackmails him for it afterwards. Yeah. And that's this slide.
Wonderful.
Help me, Mawhrin-Skel said quietly, voice almost lost in the noise of the wind. Help me get back to contact. Don't be absurd, Gurgeh said, and put out one last hand to swipe the machine out of his path. He forced his way past it. The next thing he knew, he'd been shoved down into the grass at the path side, as though shoulder charged by someone invisible. He stared up in amazement at the tiny machine floating above him, while his hands felt the damp ground under him and the grass hissed on each side. You little, he said, trying to stand up. He was shoved back down again, and sat there incredulously, simply unbelieving. No machine had ever used force on him. It was unheard of. He tried to rise again. A shout of anger?
Shout.
Shout. There we go. God, I can't type. A shout of anger and frustration forming in his throat. He went limp. The shout died in his mouth. He felt himself flop back into the grass. He lay there, looking up at the dark clouds overhead. He couldn't move his eyes. He could move his eyes. Nothing else. He remembered the missile chute and the immobility suit that it had imposed on him when he had been hit once too often. This was worse. This was paralysis. He could do nothing. He worried about his breath stopping, his heart stopping, his tongue blocking his throat, his bowels relaxing. Mawhrin-Skel floated into his field of view. Listen to me, Gurgeh. Some cold drops of rain started to patter into the grass and onto his face. Listen to me. You shall help me. I have our entire conversation, your every word and gesture from this morning recorded. If you don't help me, I'll release that recording. Everyone will know you cheated in the game against Ol's Hop. The machine paused. Do you understand, Gurgeh? Have I made myself clear? Do you realize what I am saying? There is a name, an old name, for what I am doing, in case you haven't already guessed. It's called blackmail.
It's fantastic.
I love this I love this whole part, and this is why I pulled it. I love this idea that in culture, like, physical violence is so rare, especially coming from a drone, that just like the idea that Mawhrin-Skel does it is just so absurd and ridiculous to him that he's unbelieving is the word the book uses. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's like these people don't really act violent to each other, especially like drones, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so that immediately kind of clarifies the seriousness of what's happening, that this is different, it's wrong, what is happening, what's going on, things are changing.
Yeah, it's a great moment because Mawhrin-Skel has been ominous and aggressive. He's shouted at people, he's sworn at people, or at other drones, I suppose. Like he's clearly as much of a misfit as Gurgeh is.
Yeah.
But here we find out, like, it's not just that he has a sour personality, it's that he's actually crazy.
Yeah.
Or at least so we believe for most of the book.
Yeah.
And dangerous.
Yeah, and that's the thing I love about it, is that until this point in the book, Mawhrin-Skel's craziness had been like comedic relief. Like everyone would laugh, oh, this silly drone acting all weird again. And it's like his other drone friend loves to like stab him and twist the knife, just like intentionally piss him off so he has to fly away in frustration. And it's just always been funny. And then suddenly it's not fun anymore. Suddenly it's serious. Suddenly he's doing something that no drone has ever done, that it was unheard of to do. Yeah. And it's just like it's this complete shift in the tone of the story. And that kind of moves us into the second act of this whole book. And I just love it so much.
Yeah. I love a lot about the writing. I guess not much of it is caught in this particular sample, but like this idea that he's out in like the rain and wind on the grass.
Yeah.
Something about that makes it just have this oppressive tone.
Yeah, well, it's not cultured, right? It's like dirty, right?
Yeah.
And 567 points out that because the writing, because Banks specifies that blackmail is an old name, it's something that people don't do. And I love that I agree with him that the subtleness with which Banks does that is like, he doesn't say that in this culture nobody blackmails anyone anymore. He just says, there's a name for it. It's an old name. You might not have ever heard of it because this doesn't happen anymore. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Steven says it's almost as if we find a police officer putting a gun to someone's head, but that officer had only been comic relief up to that point. I like that comparison.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I like that a lot.
All right. So in the next slide, in order to get Marwyn back into Contact, Gurgeh agrees to join Contact for a secret mission to go to the faraway Empire of Azad and play a game against the people there. We learn that the Azadians... we learn about them, so I'm going to read. That game is called Azad by the natives. It is important enough for the Empire itself to take its name from the game. You are looking at the Empire of Azad. Gurgeh did just that. The drone went on. The dominant species is humanoid, but very unusually, and certain analyses claim that this too has been a factor in the survival of the Empire as a social system. It is composed of three sexes. Three figures appeared in the center of Gurgeh's field of vision, as though standing in the middle of a ragged sphere of stars. They were rather shorter than Gurgeh, if the scale were right. Each of them looked odd in different ways, but they shared what looked to Gurgeh to be rather short legs and slightly bloated, flat, and very pale faces. The one on the left, Worthil said, is a male carrying the testes and penis. The middle one is equipped with a kind of reversible vagina and ovaries. The vagina turns inside out to implant the fertilized egg in the third sex on the right, which has a womb. The one in the middle is the dominant sex. Gurgeh had to think about this. The what? He said. The dominant sex, Worthil repeated. Empires are synonymous with centralized, if occasionally schematized, hierarchical power structures in which influence is restricted to an economically privileged class retaining its advantages through, usually, a judicious use of oppression and skilled manipulation of both the society's information dissemination systems and its lesser, as a rule nominally independent, power systems. In short, it's all about dominance. The intermediate, or apex, sex you see standing in the middle there controls the society and the empire. Generally, the males are used as soldiers and the females as possessions. Of course, it's a little more complicated than that, but you get the idea.
Yeah, so before we move on, Kyrgyzstan just made a comment I want to address before we move on, because they mentioned that the whole digression on how blackmail is usually impossible felt a bit awkward, the kind of thing that's in there because Banks wants to buttress his world building and which kind of slow things. I actually completely agree with that. I found that whole diversion like unnecessary, and it goes on for a not unsubstantial amount of pages, right? It's like no, you can't be really doing this because everyone can just make anything they want now. They can make any kind of video or audio recording just out of thin air, so you can't actually blackmail a person. It's like, no, actually we can. And it's just like the whole end of that whole thing is just, yes, you're actually blackmailed. Like you could pull that all out and the result would be the same. And I don't think it adds enough to the world building like to for that kind of digression. So I completely agree with Kyrgyzstan there.
That's the part where he basically has to get proof that the drone has like an ally in the form of a powerful ship.
Yeah, and we go all through that whole process.
Yeah. That's pretty slow. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the pacing, and I think that's one thing that drags the pace down. Anyway, sorry to jump back, but I wanted to address that.
So we're going to talk about these three genders, and so I mean, what I think he's doing here with this story, with this idea, is he wants to talk about gender, and he wants to talk about human gender because that's we're humans, but he's going to do it in a way where he slips around your defenses, especially I feel if you're a man, because basically like I think a lot of men might close down when you start talking about how men are oppressive and patriarchal and everything. But if you say, no, the men are being manipulated and used as soldiers, which is actually what men are often used for in our world, and the women are treated as property. And then there's this other sex, which you don't know about, the apex, which you can't possibly belong to, and they're horrible.
Yeah.
We hate them.
Except the book refers to them all by he in one of the most clever moves ever. Because, like, remember in the beginning of the second section of the book, the narrator basically goes, like, look, in culture we only have one pronoun, like because we don't, like, culture doesn't care about sex, like it's almost immaterial, you can change sex, like there's no kind of stigma around any of that. But in your crappy language you have gendered pronouns, so there's no way to classify this third sex in your limited language gendered pronoun. So we're just going to do the one that just so happens to be whatever the dominant one in your planet is. And of course it ends up being men. So like all the apexes in the story, I think for the most part, there may be one or two that they say she, but for the most part, all the apexes in the story are referred to as he. So you're absolutely right. Like it's such a clever way of skirting around you and being like, no, I wasn't saying that your sex is oppressive and like controlling people and terrible. It's this other one that is you. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
And it works. It works is the weird thing.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, and the thing that I love about this, and that I love about the Empire, the idea of the Empire in general, and why I completely agree with everyone that said this is the good culture book to start with, because the Empire is closer to our existence than culture is, right? We are much closer to them than these other people. So by comparing these two societies, one of which we find ourselves closer with, it allows us insights into both of them at the same time, especially when we relate more to one than the other. And I think it's just a clever way of building this culture world, by comparing it to things that we are more familiar with.
Yeah, and not. I mean, I agree with that completely. And not only that, but this book is about the tension between the like hierarchical top-down
Right.
structure of this empire and the egalitarian culture. Like that is the theme of the book. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And it's a complex one because I don't think it has easy answers.
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I completely agree with that. I love this idea. It's such an inventive thing to do, and I'm glad you said that because I completely agree with what you say.
Cool.
I'm very happy with that interpretation of the third sex.
All right, great.
All right, so now we have to learn a little bit about the game, but not much because as Sammy said earlier in the show, we don't actually learn much about the game itself, just how the game reflects on society, which is what we learn here. Now, the game is used as an absolutely integral part of the power system of the Empire. Put in the crudest terms possible, whoever wins the game becomes Emperor. Gurgeh looked round slowly at the drone, which looked back. I kid you not, it said dryly. Are you serious? Gurgeh said nevertheless. Quite entirely, the drone said. Becoming Emperor does constitute a rather unusual prize, the machine said. And the whole truth, as you might imagine, is much more complicated than that. The game of Azad is used not so much to determine which person will rule, but which tendency within the Empire's ruling class will have the upper hand, which branch of economic theory will be followed, which creeds will be recognized within the religious apparat, and which political policies will be followed. The game is also used as an exam for both entry into and promotion within the Empire's religious, educational, civil administration, judicial, and military establishments. The idea, you see, is that Azad is so complex, so subtle, so flexible, and so demanding that it is as precise and comprehensive a model of life as it is possible to construct. Whoever succeeds at the game succeeds in life. The same qualities are required in each to ensure dominance. I love this so much because, like, this is the antithesis of culture, right? Like
Yeah,
in culture, it doesn't matter who wins the game. It doesn't matter at all. In this society, that's all that matters. Like the game decide the outcome decided by the game runs every facet of their society. It is the exact opposite, and it is exactly the kind of thing that our main character would go, oh,
yeah.
really? And that's what he does here. That's what I love that you laughed at that because it's absolutely true. Like he says, I'm being serious. I kid you not. Are you
Are you serious?
serious?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
He's so like I think there's a lot in that are you serious? Like the fact that he says this nevertheless, as the book says. I
yeah,
think it's like incredulous beyond belief, but also like this attraction, right? Like there's this and we see it specifically later, but there's attraction in that are you serious? There's like this is what I was looking for.
yeah. Right. And the thing is, I think that he's even more perfect than maybe I had even realized until just now because he takes games seriously in a way that is actually kind of like looked down on by the people in the culture. But
Mm-hmm.
these people take this game more seriously than anything.
Yeah.
This is their way of basically assigning merit. Like you're only as good a person as you are good at Azad,
Yeah.
and that's like he probably wouldn't phrase it that way, but that's how he kind of sees himself. Like he's only as good a person. He only values himself to the degree that he can beat people at games because that's who he is. That's his identity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it has to be the case that Banks never really describes how exactly the game works beyond kind of like giving you some visual cues because if he did, then he would be essentially telling you like his theory of how the world works,
Right. Right.
which I mean he's kind of doing anyway because that's what a novel is. But but also I just don't think he's interested in that kind of like framing of the situation.
Yeah, well, it just doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like the details of the game are not important to what the story is trying to say. And it's this age old thing where like you come across this problem where you say, in the world of my story, this thing is so insanely complex that like only a handful of people could ever be like truly good at it. Well, then you, the author, have to make this insanely complex thing, and like if you fail to make it seem complex enough, if you invent this thing and then dive into enough detail to make your readers fully understand it, then the illusion of complexity is lost.
Yeah.
So it's much better in that situation to just be as vague as possible about it, especially when it doesn't really matter towards the theme of what your story is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's already kind of a suspension of disbelief for me, and maybe this doesn't occur to most people, but like I was thinking, like, I mean, this is the future, so like chess exists in this world, and
Uh-huh.
I'm just like, there's no way that he is the best person at chess and also the best person at everything else, because being the best, like the point is like being the best person at one game is already a full-time job. Like you can't unless he's like just like standard deviation smarter than the smartest other person. It's not really practical. It's not possible to be the best at every game.
But he's got those glands, man. The
But
super
but
glands.
everybody has super glands. So I just don't see that as realistic at all. But that like I just said like what, that's fine. This
Well,
is the
how
conceit of the
old is
story.
he?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Because people in this society live long, right?
Yeah, I don't think they live like hundreds and hundreds of years. I think they live like a few hundred years.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, I'm not sure how old he is.
I thought he was over 100 years old, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. Arena makes an interesting comment that they thought at first that Azad was a metaphor for elections, but then they kind of decided against that. What it reminds me of is actually like the old Confucian system in like Imperial China, where pretty much everything was governed by exams, um, and it was this very hierarchical. I mean, basically, it was Confucian, right? So it's like the most hierarchical thing that ever existed on Earth.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah. So Kyrgyzstan and 567 say that in book it's acknowledged that he was a games generalist, so the specialist, the people that do devote themselves to one game can beat him. Which
Now that-
I don't remember that happening, but I'm sure you're right.
yeah. Now that you say that, I think I remember that, and I think what happened is I had that objection, and then it took them a while to assuage me. So I forgot about it. Okay, that makes sense though. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Steven says culture people live for around 400 years. So yeah, that seems about right. I feel like he's over 100. I don't. I feel like I remember that earlier in the book and going, oh, so these people live a while. So
Yeah, I think that's right. All right. Move on to the next slide. This is so while Gurgeh is traveling to the Empire, he meets up with the drone that will accompany him. Good day, Jernal Gurgeh, said the drone Flare Imsaho in its squeaky little voice, settling delicately on the plump arm of the chair. As usual, its aura, aura field was yellow-green, mellow approachability. Hello, Gurgeh said, glancing at it briefly. And what have you been up to? He touched the terminal screen to inspect another set of tables and equations. Oh, well, actually, I've been studying some of the species of birds which live here within the interior of the vessel. I do find birds interesting, don't you? Hmm. Gurgeh nodded vaguely, watching the tables change. What I haven't been able to work out, he said, is when you go for a walk in the topside park, you find droppings as you'd expect to. But inside, here, everything's spotless. Does the GSV have drones to clean up after the birds, or what? I know I could just ask, but I wanted to work it out for myself. There must be some answer. Oh, that's easy, the little machine said. You just use birds and trees with a symbiotic relationship. The birds soil only in the bowls of certain trees, otherwise the fruit they depend on doesn't grow. Gurgeh looked down at the drone. I see, he said coldly. Well, I was growing tired of the problem anyway. He turned back to the equations, adjusting the floating terminal so that its screen hid Flare Imsaho from his sight. The drone stayed silent, went a confused medley to contrite purple, and do not disturb silver, and flew away.
that was not me making a typing error. That's actually what it said in the book.
Okay, I
The drone
parsed.
stayed silent, went to confused medley of contrite purple. It's just a little.
Yeah.
Sometimes his syntax is a little off. I think intentionally.
I mean, the thing is, it makes perfect sense if you hear it read
Yeah,
properly, but
it's just a
it's
mouthful. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So this is like my favorite moment in the book, and this is something we haven't really touched on very much in this book. It's very funny. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of really good humor in this book that I think Banks does really well. And this is one of those moments to me where I laughed out loud when I read this part.
Yeah. Yeah, the other culture novel I read was also really funny. In fact, it was probably even more like self-consciously comical than this one because there are characters in it who just like speak in ridiculous um, idiom because they're like from a medieval society. But yeah, I love. I mean, and this the new drone Flair Saho, who is not actually Flair Saho, is a great like it's almost like an odd couple thing they have going on where Gurgeh is always just like surly and terse
Right.
and Florian Zaho is like humming to itself all the time.
And this is like he's so different from Mawhrin-Skel, and I think that's intentional. Like their personalities almost seem the exact opposite of each other, and I
Yeah.
think that's to throw both Gurgeh and us off. But like this is such a great way to introduce that character because like we're halfway through the novel by this point, and we've got a new character introduced, and we need to quickly define his personality and how he's going to react with our protagonist, and then we just do it in this one simple thing where he's just thinking aloud. I wonder how this works, and specifically says, I know I could just ask it, but I want to work it out for myself. Oh,
Yeah.
well, let me just answer it for
Yeah.
you. And it's just like, Gurgeh looked down at the drone. I see, he said coldly.
It actually is even more funny now that you know that this is Marwin Skell
Yeah,
probably knows exactly what he's doing by screwing with Gurgeh.
yeah,
So yeah, awesome.
absolutely. Yeah, he's just like, he loves giving Gurgeh shit.
Yeah.
And he does it here very, very subtly. It's wonderful. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. We didn't pull a slide for this, but there's this whole part of the book, and I think world building wise, it's fascinating, but like again, pacing of this book, it kind of bogs it down a little bit. But he spends time on this GSV vehicle, which is like this giant ship that just kind of travels the universe and is basically a colony. Like there's 2.5 million, or there's more than that on there. There's like 250 million people on this thing. Like there's a shit ton of people on this thing.
Uh-huh.
And he spends a lot of time on here, and it's very like I love these little bits of world building we get. That's one thing I haven't like specifically said about that I enjoyed in this book. That I went into this knowing nothing about culture, knowing nothing about any of the stuff in this world, and I love how it's explained to us. It never feels overly exposition-y, and it never gets like super confusing. It's just matter of fact, and it's kind of like we start small and expand out, and then by the time we're at the Empire, we're able to contrast everything pretty effectively there.
Yeah. I don't know if you pull a slide on this, but isn't there a scene where the ship is explaining to him something about like hyperspace, and Gurgeh just doesn't give a shit, and like thus you don't get the explanation,
Yeah.
and so it's like the world building is kept very closely cropped to what Gurgeh cares about, which I think is
Yeah.
a great way of doing that.
Yeah. Well, and there's this whole recurring theme of the difference between hyperspace and ultraspace or something.
Yeah.
And that's the one time he does pay attention to it. And
Uh-huh.
he asks that question at the very end. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. But let's get to Azad. So we're now there. He traveled for 2 whole years to get to this planet, and he prepares to meet the most important people of the Empire for the first time. And this slide is kind of, I think it's starting to lay the seeds of the triple and quadruple crosses that are going to be happening throughout the rest of this book. The fact that everything is manipulation, everything is half truth, is kind of the seeds are laid for that here. We'll use your full name when they announce you at the ball tonight. Sounds reasonably impressive. They can't grasp we don't have any real ranks either, so you may find they use Murat as kind of a title. The little drone dipped to fix a stray gold thread near the hem. It's all to the good in the end. They're a bit blind to the culture, just because they can't comprehend it in their own hierarchical terms. Can't take us seriously. What a surprise. I've got a feeling it's all part of the plan. Even this delinquent ambassador, is part of it. You too, I think. You think? Gurgeh said. They've built you up, Gurgeh, the drone told him, rising his head height. rising to head height and brushing his hair back a little. Gurgeh, in turn, brushed the meddlesome field away from his brow. Contacts told the Empire you're one hot-shot game player. They've said they reckon you can get to a Colonel Bishop Jr. ministerial level. What? Gurgeh said, looking horrified. That's not what they told me. Or me, the drone said. I only found out myself looking at a news roundup an hour ago. They're setting you up, man. They want to keep the Empire happy, and they're using you to do it. First, they get them good and worried, telling them you can beat some of their finest players. Then, when, as is probably going to happen, you get knocked out in the first round, they thereby reassure the Empire the culture's just a joke. We get things wrong. We're easily humiliated. Gurgeh looked levelly at the drone, eyes narrowed. First round, you think, do you? He said calmly. Oh, I'm sorry. The little drone wavered back a little in the air, looking embarrassed. Are you offended? I was just assuming. Well, I've watched you play. I mean, the machine's voice trailed off.
Once again, this is much funnier knowing it's Mawhrin-Skel.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's manipulation, right? Like, this whole thing, he's lying to him here. But, I mean, he's half-truthing to him here. They have built him up to the Empire, but it is not to make the Empire look good. It is the opposite of that.
Right, and I think the culture actually expects Gurgeh to win.
Yeah, and they're pushing him here. They're motivating him here. He's subtly demeaning him, saying like, you're not that good at this game. Like what's as is probably going to happen. You'll get knocked out in their first round. It's like we like. While showing how culture is manipulating things through half-truths, there's also another level of manipulation going on here to our protagonist. And I think that's so clever, especially looking back on it after you finish the book. It's like he's pushing him again and again and again while also admitting that culture is manipulating things.
Yeah. I think it's just a really fun story element that the Azadians have all been led to believe, except for like a small number of their leadership, that the culture is like basically equal to them in technology, when actually the culture could easily kind of just like crush them if they wanted to, but that's not how the culture works. So he continually throughout the story, they have to seem like they're less technologically advanced and smaller than they actually are. I just like that element that occurs.
And just stupider in general, right? Like there's the thing that the drone has to wear to make him look bulkier, and he has to make noises, which again I think is subtly setting you up for the fact that like they disguise themselves. Like they do it to external forces, but they also do to internally as well. They're just manipulating everyone.
Yeah.
567 says, I suspected a bit that this was manipulations, but went, nah, clearly for Imsaho is just a bumbling, socially awkward dude. It likes bird watching after all. Yeah, that's something we didn't touch on, like how clever the bird watching idea to introduce to this character is, because it really, like, no bad guys ever liked bird watching.
Right. Yeah. It's endearing. It's successfully endearing.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, Stephen. The idea that they don't just want him to win, but they want him to win in a specific way, that the culture does.
Yeah.
All right. Next slide. It's time to start the games. So here we go. All over the city that morning, people were going to their first game of the new series. From the optimistic young player lucky enough to win a place in the games in a state lottery, right up to Nikasar himself. Those 12,000 people faced that day knowing that their lives might change utterly and forever, for better or worse, starting from right now. The whole city was alive with the game fever, which infected it every 6 years. Grosnitschek was packed with the players, their retinues, advisors, college mentors, relations, and friends. The Empire's press and news service, and visiting delegations from colonies and dominions there to watch the future course of imperial history being decided. Despite his earlier euphoria, Gurgeh discovered that his hands were shaking by the time they they arrived at the hall, and as he was led into the place with its high white walls and its echoing wood floor, an unpleasant sensation of churning seemed to emanate from his belly. It felt quite different from the normal feeling of being keyed up, which he experienced before most games. This was something else, keener and more thrilling and unsettling than anything he'd known before.
So he's got butterflies in his tummy, and he doesn't know what that feels like
Yeah.
because he's so different from human.
Yeah.
Like I love this. I love this slide, Matt, because we start like at the biggest level. We start with like the empire wide nervousness, and then we kind of distill it down from this empire wide picture down to our main character, who is just kind of as nervous as everyone else and as awaiting as everyone else. And remember, like, as far as he knows, he has no skin in this game. Like, this game doesn't matter. He's just there to kind of like, prove that culture's great, but and that he's good at this game. But like, he can't win anything really.
Yeah. Right.
But he's so nervous, and I love that the feeling he has in this moment parallels the feeling he had when he was caught, quote unquote, cheating. Like, it's that there's a lot of similarity to the word usage here, like a feeling he'd never felt before. This is something completely new that he'd never experienced. It kind of lines up and I think makes clear that moment as an original motivation that led him to this moment right here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's basically that it matters to him, right? Like back in the
Right.
culture, it wouldn't really matter to him if he lost, but it does matter to him if his reputation is damaged. And so that's why he got so much out of those like cheating and near cheating incidents. But here it means a lot to him because he just sees this game as being really important.
Yeah, yeah. Because it is. Some would say the most important.
Yes.
But I love the little hints about like sensations and feelings that to us are normal, that to him is completely alien and new. There's a spot later in the book, and I didn't pull the slide, but where like he talks about how he was smiling at another player, and he mentions smiling as like a thing that is native to this empire and not something he does normally. Like, it's just so off-putting. It's like when people smile at each other. It's like, wait, what? I think it's so fantastic.
That's funny. Yeah, I forgot about that.
All right, so next up, after the games have started playing, Gurgeh is on the verge of losing his first game when suddenly something clicks in him. Gurgeh played the piece. It was as though he saw two boards, one here in front of him and one engraved into his mind from the night before. The other players made their moves, gradually forcing Gurgeh back into one small area of the board, with only a couple free pieces outside it, hunted and fleeing. When it came, as he'd known it would without wanting to admit to himself that he did know, he could only think of it as a revelation, made him want to laugh. In fact, he did rock back in his seat, head nodding. The priest looked at him expectantly, as though waiting for the stupid human to finally give up. But Gurgeh smiled over at the apex, selected the strong cards from his dwindling supply, deposited them with the adjudicator, and made his next move. All he was banking on, it turned out, was the rest being too concerned with winning the game quickly. It was obvious that some sort of deal had been arranged which would let the priest win, and Gurgeh guessed that the others wouldn't be playing at their best when they weren't competing for someone else. It would not be their victory. They would not own it. Certainly they did not have to play well. Sheer weight of numbers could compensate for indifferent play. But the moves could become a language, and Gurgeh thought he could speak that language now, well enough, tellingly, to lie in it. So he made his moves, and at one moment, with one move, seemed to be suggesting that he had given up. Then, with his next move, he appeared to indicate he was determined to take one of the 7 players down with him, or 2 of them, or a different one. The lies went on. There was no single message, but rather a succession of contradictory signals, pulling the syntax of the game to and fro until the common understanding the other players had reached began to fatigue and tear and split.
It's awesome. And this is what's so great about this is we have no idea really what the rules are. There's cards, there's pieces.
Yeah.
You place pieces. They have incredibly intricate like interactions, but he can still write about what's happening in the game and kind of this abstract level where he compares it to language, and you understand exactly what's going on at the level that it matters.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love it so much. Like this I think this is fantastic writing, and I think like the idea of it just like you said, as a language, a way of communicating, a way of seeing. He describes it as kind of people like seeing each other in a way. Like I think when he's playing the Emperor a bit later, he says that like he feels that they have a bond, that they know each other better than anyone else knows each other because they're just in this game together. And yeah, you don't have to know the rules of it to get that. And I just love how he describes all of this. I love like the strategy of it. It's like he's describing a game, but it's like also kind of describing just battle in its own,
Yeah.
like a war. It's just wonderful.
Right. And that's the thing is like because the game is so complex and so like mirroring of real life, the kinds of decisions you make in the game absolutely reflect the kinds of decisions that you make in real life.
Right.
And so it is a kind of like bond that you form and a way of like seeing it, a person's soul when you're playing it with them. I love that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So next, Gurgeh is winning and having a good time. The culture ambassador takes him out to a club, and he's about to hook up with some ladies when suddenly some crazy shit happens and he almost dies. A lot of Gurgeh's journey in this book can be seen as someone chasing danger, and this is one of the biggest examples of this. Gurgeh started forward. The apex took a gun from a pocket. Gurgeh stopped. Inclate went quiet. Atsen whimpered on the floor. The apex started talking, far too fast for Gurgeh to follow. He pointed at the woman on the floor, then gestured at the ceiling. He began to cry, and the gun shook in his hand. And part of Gurgeh, sitting back calmly, analyzing, thought, am I frightened? Is this fear yet? I'm looking death in the face, staring at it through that little black hole, the little twisted tunnel in this alien's hand, like another element the hand can show, and I'm waiting to feel fear, and it hasn't happened yet. I'm still waiting. Does this mean that I shan't die now, or that I shall? Life or death, in a finger's twitch, a single nerve pulse, just one perhaps not fully willed decision by some jealous, irrelevant, one-credit shithead 100 millennia from home. The apex backed away, gesturing imploringly, pathetically, to Atsen, and at Gurgeh and Inclate. He came forward and kicked Atsen once in the back with no great force, making her cry out, then turned and ran, shouting incoherently and throwing the gun down on the floor. Gurgeh ran after him, vaulting over Atsen. The apex disappeared down a dark spiral staircase at the far end of the curved passage. Gurgeh started to follow, then stopped. The sound of clattering footsteps died away. He went back to the jade-lit corridor.
So you mentioned that like you thought that the sections where they kind of went out on the town, like this whole part of the book, while brief, was kind of a tone bummer for you, or a pace bummer rather.
Yeah. Yeah.
I I I agree with you. I mean, I think I can see the purpose in it, right? Like, we learned that the ambassador is actually just a mercenary that they hired as just part of their manipulation, right? So
Yeah.
him probably bringing him out here at night was to get him scared. Like, I think a lot of what they're doing to Gurgeh here is to like try to manipulate him into not liking it here. Like, because I think that's one of the things culture is kind of worried about, is that he'll like it too much and lose his essential cultureness, which will cause him to not win the game. And so this strikes me as like something that culture like put together and planned to keep him afraid and keep him like not liking this place.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I like that. It kind of ties in with the scene later when the drone takes him or like shows him the horrifying stuff that's on the TV and then like
Yeah.
takes him throughout the city and shows him how awful
Yeah, I got a
this
lot to
place
say
is.
about that stuff too.
Yeah, so it seems like this is like a prelude to that. It's almost like planting the seed, but not quite pulling the trigger on it yet.
Yeah, well, because this didn't work. Because like, I mean, look at it. Like, am I frightened? Is this fear? I don't feel anything. I don't feel
Yeah.
afraid. And in fact, when the guy drops the gun and goes to run away, he almost follows him. Gurgeh ran after him, vaulting over at Sen, and then he started to follow, and then stopped. So like, it didn't work. And we never really figure out like what this guy's talking about here. And I think to me, part of it was like, he wasn't supposed to shoot him. He was just supposed to scare him.
Uh-huh.
And so he didn't know what to do. So he just dropped the gun and ran away. Because I don't think we ever like figure out, like we were told that like there were like trying to do this complex sting operation where they were going to catch him on tape having sex with these girls and then use that as blackmail against him later. Which is, we're told that it's the Empire doing this, but now that we know who the droid is here, like, he's used blackmail before, so I don't know. Like, I think this is fascinating to kind of get into our character's mind and exactly why this attempt to kind of scare him away from the Empire didn't work.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of it just didn't make sense to me the first time through. But now reflecting back on it, like I think a lot of what's happening, correct me if you got a different impression, but like a lot of what's happening as he's going through like these seedy areas is he's seeing like heinous things, but because he's from the culture, he like doesn't recognize them as such. He's like, this must be an act, basically.
Yeah, yeah. He
And
has to be told very specifically, no, this is real. This
yeah,
is real.
and,
Yeah,
and he like can't like fathom it. He like doesn't compute for him, and he
right.
pretty much forgets about all this, as far as I can tell. And it has to kind of be hammered into his skull later, and that's when it kind of like basically is a character change.
Yeah. Yeah, Joshua said it ties into the video he's shown later. Yeah, and I think
Yeah,
we pulled a slide around there, so we'll
yeah,
definitely dive into that. I think that says a lot to me about the Empire, a lot about culture, and a lot about what I think Banks is trying to say by contrasting these two societies.
yeah. I like this element. You mentioned the idea that he might become um, too much of the Azad culture, and I remember that he like there's a certain point later in the story when he's spoken the Azadian language for so long that he like sort of can't slip back into or he has difficulty with the culture language. Like he started thinking in Azadian,
Yeah,
and like the culture language is basically like viewed as something that kind of keeps them culture
yeah,
because it like contains the assumptions of their culture.
yeah.
So like this is sort of a scary thing.
And it's after that moment that the drone takes him out in the city that
Uh-huh.
he's realizing that he's losing the language. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, makes
All right.
sense.
So this next slide, man, I just think this is really funny.
Okay,
I don't know if I have anything else to say about it, but maybe we'll get something when we go through it.
okay,
So he's talking to an administrator. He's advanced to the next level of the games, and once you advance to the next level of the games, you have to give them your premises, which is basically like your moral code, like who you are as a person. I'm assuming it's like a survey or something you have to fill out, because that's important to the game. Although like it's kind of vague how that actually matters to the day-to-day playing of the game. But again, that's just because so much of the operation of this thing is left out of the story. But anyway. While not, strictly speaking, my province, I confess I'd be interested if you could tell me a little about your plans for the registration of premises. He turned and looked at Gurgeh. I haven't decided quite how to express them yet, Gurgeh said. I'll register for them tomorrow, probably. The Apex nodded thoughtfully. He pulled at one sleeve of the Imperial uniform. I wonder if I might advise you to be somewhat circumspect, Mr. Gurgeh. Gurgeh asked the drone to translate circumspect. Olos waited, then continued. Of course, you must register with the Bureau, but as you know, your participation in these games is in a purely honorary capacity. And so exactly what you say in your premises has only statistical value, shall we say? Gurgeh asked the drone to translate capacity. Garbleness glame playeroid, Flurged Imsaho muttered darkly in how do you pronounce Mawhrin?
Moraine. Yeah.
Twiddly dee, you that word capacity before used is etchic in placey wacy's buggy wuggy stoppy toppy these guys splatty be more cluets on the lingo offering righty. Gurgeh suppressed a smile. Olos went on. As a rule, contestants must be prepared to defend their views with arguments, should the Bureau find it necessary to challenge any of them. But I hope you will understand that this will hardly be likely to happen to you. The Imperial Bureau is not blind to the fact that the values of your society may be quite different from our own. We have no wish to embarrass you by forcing you to reveal things that press and the majority of our citizens might find offensive. He smiled. Personally, off the record, I would imagine that you could be quite, one might almost say, vague, and nobody would be especially bothered. Especially? Gurgeh said innocently to the humming, crackling little droid at his side. More gibberishness, blikovit nigget firds. Your quantum trying nomino worst my zibizik the fucking patience, Gurgeh. So I just thought this was hilarious. Like he's pretending to not understand words and have his droid translate it, and you catch just enough to know what's going on here. Like he says, the place is bugged. Stop giving them clues to our language.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because yeah, it's established that they don't want these guys to figure out Moraine, so they
Right.
avoid speaking it, and yeah, which like I don't know anything about cryptography or languages, but it seems like this would be a pretty effective way to keep people from figuring out your language.
Oh yeah, because half the stuff is just nonsense.
Yeah.
The thing that I love about it is he's clearly lying here. He knows what these words mean because at the end of this conversation, he's just screwing with this guy, and he uses like two of the three words that he just asked to translate because he didn't understand. Like
Yeah.
it's so funny, and like I don't like. The thing that's interesting to me is like there's some serious conversation going on here. Like this guy is basically like the registration of premises. I think we learn a little bit later is like very important to kind of how the Empire keeps control, because like you have to like tell your belief system, you have to like register your belief system with the government to play this game, and then they have no problem like taking out anyone that could be a dissenter or could be someone that speaks out against the system. So like it's actually this like really terrible way like control method built into the game, and it's like it's over like it's lined with this hilarious jokey scene. And I think to me that's our main character like not quite understanding how terrible the Empire is yet still. Like he's just having a good time, he's winning the game, he's playing well, he's like, and he's not taking any of this really serious. I mean, he's taking it seriously because he wants to win, but like he's not seeing the underbelly of all this stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's not even clear until much later how naive he is, and
Right.
everyone in the culture really. They're all so sheltered
Yeah.
that it's just inconceivable what the reality is.
Steven says, Alexa, how do I speak Moraine? And I'm sorry, anyone out there that has one that I just activated yours. I apologize. Hopefully you're listening on headphones.
Yes. All right. So next, what happens is Gurgeh keeps winning and seems to be becoming more and more Azadian with each passing day. So one day, Flair decides to show him the seedy underbelly of the Empire. This is no special night, Gurgeh, no festival of Sado-erotica. These things go out every evening. There is more, but you've seen a representative cross-section. Gurgeh nodded. His mouth was dry. He swallowed with some difficulty, took a few more deep breaths, rubbed his beard. He opened his mouth to speak, but the drone spoke first. One other thing. Something else they have kept from you. I didn't know this myself until last night when the ship mentioned it. Ever since you played ROM, your opponents have been on various drugs as well. Cortex-keyed amphetamines, at least. But they have far more sophisticated drugs which they use too. They have to inject or ingest them. They don't have genofixed glands to manufacture drugs in their own bodies, but they certainly use them. Most of the people you've been playing have far more artificial chemicals and compounds in their bloodstream than you've had. The drone made a sighing noise. The man was still staring at the dead screen. That's it, the drone said. I'm sorry if what I've shown you has upset you, Jernal Gurgeh, but I didn't want you to leave here thinking the Empire was just a few venerable game players, some impressive architecture, and a few glorified nightclubs. What you've seen tonight is also what it's about. And there's plenty in between that I can't show you. All the frustrations that affect the poor and the relatively well-off alike, caused simply because they live in a society where one is not free to do as one chooses. There's the journalist who can't write what he knows is the truth, the doctor who can't treat somebody in pain because they're the wrong sex. A million things every day, things that aren't as melodramatic and gross as what I've shown you, but which are still part of it, still some of the effects. The ship told you a guilty system recognizes no innocence. I'd say it does. It recognizes the innocence of a young child, for example, and you saw how they treated that. In a sense, it even recognizes the sanctity of the body, but only to violate it. Once again, Gurgeh, it all boils down to ownership, possession, about taking and having.
Yeah, so that's the truth of the Empire, which is not too dissimilar from the world which we live in, Matt. I mean, this is like infinitely worse in some ways. The torturous, like government sanctioned sex crimes that go on every night
Yeah,
are unquestionably awful, and at least it's something we can say most of the governments on our planet don't
right.
sanction that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Again, we have to say most, but I mean, it's like it's unquestionably awful. But I think like again, I think what Banks is doing here is really interesting to me because we have this idyllic utopian society, and then we have this terrible, awful society that's like ours, but to the 20th terrible degree, right?
Hmm.
And I think by comparing them, we're seeing the strengths and the weaknesses in both of them, right? Like this line talks about like that the all the bad things that happen in this world are caused simply because they live in a society where one is not free to do as one chooses, which is true. But again, we've talked about already how in culture you're not necessarily as free to do whatever you want as you think. You're just the manipulate or the control over you is just more subtle,
Yeah.
more sneaky. Like this line here, I love the part about the journalist, a journalist who can't write what he knows is the truth. Okay, well, culture is keeping things from their society too.
Right.
Like this whole civilization, culture has kept secret. Like it's like, and I'm not trying to say culture is as bad as the empire, but I'm just saying by contrasting these two things, we see that culture is not this idyllic utopia that it seems to be.
Yeah, I think that there's, I mean, I don't think I'm polluting too much knowledge from the other book or from what I know outside of it, but like the name special circumstances itself is just a wonderfully Orwellian bit of language
Yeah,
because it implies like, yeah, we employ completely different tactics that actually are contrary to our like to the ethos of our culture when we really need to in really special circumstances.
yeah,
But like actually it seems like special circumstances is like the the steel of the culture. It is the
yeah, yeah,
core of how they conduct their foreign policy. Is probably how they manage their own citizens to a degree. Like this idea of we're gonna win. We're gonna win at whatever cost, so that we can continue to have this nice, hedonistic, egalitarian society. And it's like, yeah, that's well. I mean, I'm not it's certainly better than the empire. Like,
right.
bec- as you just said, I'd rather live in the culture than the empire, obviously. And the thing is, it really forces you to think about utopia because it's like, what how much better could you get than the culture, even
Yeah,
considering its flaws, like even conceivably, because it's post scarcity. It's got AI babysitters making sure that everyone's as safe as they could possibly be. So if you find flaw with that, then like that's just like the finding finding the fact that that like the human condition is intrinsically impossible to make happy.
yeah. I mean, and I think that's kind of what Banks is saying here, right? Like, I mean, I think Gurgeh is an example of unhappiness in utopia. Like, he did not have a happy existence,
Yeah.
and to me, we haven't gotten there yet. But to me, the ending of this book is melancholy too. Like, he comes home, he's back with all the people, his friends, and the people he cares about. I don't think he's suddenly like a happy person either. Like he's not like he didn't have this experience and now he's like, okay, I had an experience. I'm going to live out the rest of my days happy in this utopia. He's probably just going to be the same kind of mild level of just kind of not unhappy but not particularly happy either. And that I think that is saying a lot of things about like what we look as utopian.
Yeah, I think he might have just learned that he was taking the culture for granted. Um, but as you say, I don't think that like made him, like Scrooge at the end of A
Yeah.
Christmas Story.
I mean, he's also seen like the worst parts of it. Like
Right.
he was taking for granted the good parts, but he's also seen the bad parts. And
Yeah.
how do you kind of wrestle with that?
Right.
Arena Venera says one of the things I sort of don't like about this book's philosophy is that it kind of feels like it conflates competitiveness, domination, ownership, and sadism when those feel like very distinct things to me. Yeah, I get that. I think to me it's like the Empire takes like the worst possible um, version of distinctly human traits and puts them all together, right? Like this is like to me this is like our worst instincts um, compounded on each other.
Yeah. I think the critical thing about Azad is that like they have high tech. They potentially have the capacity to be post scarcity such that everyone could be at least like taken care of. And instead they enact this system of control and
Yeah, because
and
that's what they place value in. Yeah.
that's what they place value in, and they enjoy the sadism of it, or at
Yeah.
least the apexes at the top do, and it's a self-perpetuating system of sadism, which is completely unnecessary. I think it's actually kind of crucial to like remember that they're high tech. They don't
Yeah.
really need to be this way.
Yeah. Well, and it's like when he has the conversation with Haman later in the book, he specifically says that rules only exist so that we could take pleasure in breaking them, right? Like they're a society completely driven by rules, but they don't value the rules and the laws in and of themselves. They value them so they're things to be broken,
Yeah.
which again, ties right into our main character and the instigating incident that brought this whole thing on, right? Like he broke the rules.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. 567 says, I expected this to make Gurgeh more righteously angry and try to challenge the Empire, try to take it down. But Gurgeh never seems to explicitly take up a moral stance against the Empire. I think that's right. I agree with that. Like, I was kind of expecting that too. And it's not that, I think it's not that, like, he doesn't care. I think it just kind of divorces him from his, like, fairy tale view of this place. Like, he doesn't like it anymore, but he's not like, I must destroy this thing. Like, I think I think that's one thing that happens under the cultural society. Like, you're too removed from it. Like, it's so, even if you saw it, you're so far away from it, from that, like, from understanding that that's an experience that actually happens to people. Like, the idea of suffering is such a difficult concept for them to understand.
I see. I'm thinking of the scene where like the high society apexes take him to like a soiree, and like they basically offer him all this stuff to give up or to lose on purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
And they're like trying to tempt him with all these things that like he clearly doesn't find tempting, but he's playing along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I read that scene as him being like, I'm gonna fucking destroy these guys in
Oh,
his
really?
head, and being like just like having decided like I realize exactly what you're trying to do here, and I'm gonna play along until I can just crush you.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was like something in the voice acting maybe that like twisted my perception of it.
That's interesting. I didn't see that, but now that you say it, I could see it. I still feel like he's very cold to it. Like I don't see him as ever like angry. Well,
Hmm.
because like I mean, and maybe it's just part of his illusion, but there's like the part where he's hunting with them, and the hunting is like designed to be this really cruel thing. Like it's not even really hunting. They're
Yeah.
like leading the animals through this trough, and it's a great metaphor for like just everything that's going on with how they're being led through all this manipulation into this final conflict. But it's not real sport. Like it's just
Yeah.
fake, right? And he's not really enjoying it, but he's not like disgusted by it either.
Yeah.
It's mostly that he's not enjoying it because he's not good at it, and it's related back to the physical activity game at the very beginning of the story. It's just like something that he's not very good at, so he's like he doesn't bother.
Yeah. I guess my reading on that, like I don't think I disagree. I think it was more like his mind is he's an obsessive character. Like that's kind of the key thing about him. And he's like so obsessed with the game at this point, at that point in the story when they're shooting fish in the barrel,
Yeah,
that he's just like not paying attention to what's happening around him anymore.
yeah, yeah. That's true. But I mean, he also like the book mentions several times about how bad of a shot he is, and I feel like maybe if he was better at that particular game, he might be a little more into it. I don't know.
Yeah.
That might be putting stuff on the character. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting.
Stephen says special circumstances says we can violate people's rights to achieve a good end, but ultimately Azad believes the same thing. So the question becomes, what is actually right and good? Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that the book is asking. Although, like, I want to be clear here. Like, I am not in any way saying culture is like at the same level of terribleness that this empire is. I don't think that's true. I think that
Yeah.
the empire is drawn to be this like worst of humanity type of existence.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think culture gets out of this thing clean either. Like, and I don't think the book is wanting you to say, oh yeah, culture is perfect. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, I like there's no world in which you don't sometimes have to do some bad things to achieve good things farther down the line. Like if
isn't
you're
that world called a utopia?
Yeah, but that would only really exist if the culture controlled everything, you know? Like,
Don't they?
well, they don't control Azad.
Well, yeah, they just take it. They just destroy it.
Yeah, yeah, they just destroy it exactly. And their ideology spreads further. So,
Yeah. I mean, well, never mind. We'll get to that slide in a
okay.
sec. So I want to talk about that in a bit. Yeah, it's actually the next one.
Okay.
So Gurgeh keeps winning, and though the entire empire hates him now, he refuses to drop out of the contest. While they're waiting for the final matches to start, Gurgeh spends some time with Haman, whatever, the emperor's mentor, and possibly actually the most powerful man in the empire. And we use this interaction with this guy to tell a little bit more about culture. Haman obviously found it hard to believe that culture really did do without money. But what if I do want something unreasonable? What? My own planet, Haman wheezed with laughter. How can you own a planet? Gurgeh shook his head. But suppose I wanted one. I suppose if you found an unoccupied one, you could land without anyone becoming annoyed. Perhaps that could work, but how would you stop other people from landing there too? Could I not buy a fleet of warships? All our ships are sentient. You could certainly try telling a ship what to do, but I don't think you'd get very far. Your ships think they're sentient, Hammond chuckled. A common delusion shared by some of our human citizens. Hammond found the cultural sexual morals even more fascinating. He was at once delighted and outraged that the culture regarded homosexuality, incest, sex changing, hermaphrodite, and sexual characteristic alteration as just something else people did, like going on a cruise or changing their hairstyle. Hammond thought this must take all the fun out of things. Didn't the culture forbid anything? Gurgeh attempted to explain that there were no written laws, but almost no crime anyway. There was the occasional crime of passion, as Hammond chose to call it, but little else. It was difficult to get away with anything when everyone had a terminal, but there were very few motives left, too. But if someone kills someone else? Gurg shrugged. They're slap-droned. Ah, this sounds more like it. What does the drone do? Follows you around and makes sure you never do it again. Is that all? What more do you want? Social death, Hammond. You don't get invited to too many parties. Ah, but in your culture, can't you gate crash? I suppose so, Gurg conceded. But nobody talked to you. So this is a fascinating exploration of culture, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I think I realized when reading this part is like how much has to exist for a utopian society to be possible, right? Like
Yeah.
a slap drone has to be a technology. Like you have to have a drone that is able to follow people around and make sure they don't do anything again. You have to have this this tablet like thing that is like tracks them constantly and records everything they do and say and like is kind of stops them from doing anything. Obviously you have to have no scarcity anymore. If people want for things, then they're going to do crime. That's just the way it works. So it's like a pretty good exploration of what it actually takes for this type of society to exist. And that's a lot of stuff, man.
Yeah. And it also kind of seems like there are things around the edges that are just pushing on the minds of the citizens such that they don't even consider certain things. Like the idea of taking a planet to Gurgeh is just like, why would someone want such a thing? When like to us as, humans who have only really been on one planet, we're like, oh, of course I want a planet.
Yeah.
Because it just like we have no like proportionality and our culture hasn't taught us what it's appropriate to want when you go out to that scope.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
also on top of that, the idea that like if it were us, like we would totally try to like build a fleet of non-sentient warships so that we could take over what we wanted. But in the culture, that doesn't even occur to them because they're like, a warship is a sentient thing.
Yeah.
That's what a warship is. How else would you get a warship?
Right. Well, it's, I mean, just the entire idea of ownership is like, they don't understand it. Like they don't like it's not something they get. And that's why Kirkisan says Gurg's whole position regarding planet ownership there came off a bit weird, sidestepping the real questions, probably intended by Banks to convey the disconnect in their worldviews, I guess. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's what it is that he fundamentally doesn't understand the concept of the question. What if you want something really unreasonable and extravagant? like what do you mean
Yeah.
by that? Like
Yeah.
what is that? What is
Yeah.
ownership? What is wanting to own something?
I think that the conversation like is the perfect arc because at the end of it, Gurgeh is like social death is the worst possible thing that could happen, obviously.
Yeah.
And like having material possessions is like completely meaningless because you can have pretty much anything. So this guy's like, what if I wanted a planet? And but then he's like not bothered by the thought of murdering someone and having a slap drone. So it's
Yeah.
just like completely different focuses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too that like a lot of punishment for murder in our society is not just so they can't do it again. It's like you there should be some consequences for doing something bad, and that just sees it's something that this society really doesn't care that much about.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. They don't seem to have a concept of punishment.
Yeah, except as 567 says as social isolation,
Yeah.
which I guess in a hedonistic society, not being able to hang out with people would be like the worst thing.
Right. But I don't even know if that's like, I don't even know if they're using that as punishment. Like, I think it's just that no one wants to hang out with them.
Right,
It's just a
right. Yeah, it's not.
consequence.
Yeah, it's just like yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think you're right. Yeah.
All right. Moving on. So,
So we're at the final game now.
yeah, final game against Emperor Nikasar. So he's won everything. This is all being hidden, of course.
Yeah. That actually, let's talk about that for a bit because that confused me at first. Um, when he said no matter if you win or not, we're gonna tell everyone you lost. So in my mind, I was like, oh, well then he's just not gonna get to play anymore. And then he kept playing, and I was like, oh, they're still gonna let him play. They're just gonna not tell anyone they're letting him play.
Yeah. Well,
And I was like,
yeah.
oh, I get it.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it speaks to kind of the way they treat the game. Because I think even these like high level officials, they know that they can't just not let him play because then they would know that he he could beat them,
Right. It would be them admitting that he's better, right?
right?
Yeah.
And then that would like destroy their society, even if it were just these high level people who knew that fact. Anyway, okay. It took Gurgeh most of the morning's play to gradually work out what Nikasar was up to. When eventually he did, it took his breath away. The Emperor had set out to beat not just Gurgeh, but the whole culture. There was no other way to describe his use of pieces, territory, and cards. He had set up his whole side of the match as an empire, the very image of Azad. Another revelation struck Gurgeh with a force almost as great. One reading, perhaps the best, of the way he'd always played was that he played as the culture. He'd habitually set up something like the society itself when he constructed his positions and deployed his pieces, a net, a grid of forces and relationships without any obvious hierarchy or entrenched leadership, and initially quite profoundly peaceful. In all the games he'd played, the fight had always come to Gurgeh initially. He thought of the period before as preparing for battle, but now he saw that if he'd been alone on the board, he'd have done roughly the same, spreading slowly across the territories, consolidating gradually, calmly, economically. Of course, it had never happened. He was always attacked. And once the battle was joined, he developed that conflict as assiduously and totally as before he tried to develop the patterns and the potential of unthreatened pieces in undisputed territory. Every other game he committed against had unwittingly tried to adjust to this novel style in its own terms, and comprehensively failed. Nikasar was trying no such thing. He'd gone the other way and made the board his empire, complete and exact in every structural detail, to the limits of the definition of the games imposed. Okay, is that a word? No.
I don't know. I don't even know anymore.
Uh,
Games can impose. I don't even know.
um,
The final game with the Emperor is incredible. The
yeah,
writing of it is so incredible. Here, I didn't even pull out some of my favorite parts about it because I ran out of slides. Um, I, I love the idea of this, and like basically what we've set up is because the game is like you said earlier, because the game is so complex, these things have become perfect stand-ins for their two societies, and we're basically now in this moment saying, okay, here is society versus society, which one is better, and the winning of this game will decide which is better, and the culture wins. But interestingly enough, they kept all the truth of what the culture was doing behind the scenes, because I think it would have affected how Gurgeh, consciously or not, played the game, because it would have affected his view of his society and his view on the world, which would intrinsically move into the game itself. So it was like the perfect great version of the culture that he knew versus this evil society, because the real culture does not just calmly economically expand slowly across territories. We know that. I mean, they orchestrate the fall of this empire. They are not just these people that don't attack unless provoked. It is much more complicated than that. They have this special circumstances wing that he didn't fully understand. So I just love like how that metaphor kind of becomes literal and plays out like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm going back and forth over whether I think that Gurgeh implicitly is weaving his conception of how the culture wages war into this, because the culture also has had wars. Like, isn't that I know that from out of story, material,
Mm-hmm.
but isn't it clear within the story that the culture has had actual wars before?
Well, they have warships, and
Yeah.
Steven says in the chat here that the warships in the later books are treated as fringe personalities. So the culture being a ship of war is at least partially transgressive. So yes, they do have war, but it is not like it is not a thing that they like.
They don't honor,
Yeah,
martial prowess or whatever,
yeah,
but they need it.
yeah.
Yeah. So do I have two slides in a row? Looks
Oh,
like I do.
well, I
Yep.
probably just
Doesn't matter. You want me to go ahead?
no. I'll do it.
Okay.
I probably just messed it up. That's my bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just read this one and you get the next one.
Okay.
So he beats the Emperor, Matt. He wins. Culture wins. Culture's the better society. Congratulations, Utopia. And then the Emperor kind of goes nuts and like tries to burn them all to death. And he escapes barely with the help of his drone friend. And then we get like an explanation of what's going on here. You've been used, Jernau Gurgeh, the drone said matter-of-factly. The truth is, you were playing for the culture, and Nikosar was playing for the Empire. I personally told the Emperor that night before the start of the last match that you really were our champion. If you won, we were coming in. We'd smash the Empire and impose our own order. If he won, we'd keep out for as long as he was Emperor, and for the next 10 great years anyway. That's why Nikosar did all he did. He wasn't just a sore loser. He'd lost his empire. He had nothing else to live for, so why not go in a blaze of glory? Was all that true? Gurgeh asked. Would we really have taken over? Gurgeh, Flair Imsaho said. I have no idea. Not in my brief. No need to know. It doesn't matter. He believed it was true. Slightly unfair pressure, Gurgeh said, smiling without any humor at the machine. Telling someone they're playing for such high stakes just the night before the game. Gamespersonship. So why didn't he tell me what we were playing for? Guess. The bet would have been off, and we come in guns blazing anyway. Correct! Gurgeh shook his head, brushed a little soot off one jacket sleeve, smudging it. You really thought I'd win? He asked the drone. Against Nikosar? You thought that, even before I got here? Before you left Chark, Gurgeh. As soon as you showed interest in leaving. SC's been looking for someone like you for quite a while. The Empire's been ripe to fall for decades. It needed a big push, but it could always go. Coming in all guns blazing, as you put it, is almost never the right approach. Azad, the game itself, had to be discredited. It was what had held the Empire together for all these years, the linchpin. But that made it the most vulnerable point, too. The drone made a show of looking around at the mangled debris of the hall. Everything worked out a little more dramatically than we'd expected, I must admit, but it looks like all the analysis of your abilities and Nikosar's weaknesses were just about right.
It's great.
So yeah, this is the big reveal, Matt. This is the reveal that he's been manipulated this whole time. That they were just manipulating everything. And I love this idea of, was it true? Were you going to go in and wipe these people out if I won this game? And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like that's not important. It's not important what's true or not. It's important what people believe.
Well, and the fact is, like, he did win the game, and culture didn't come in guns blazing. What happened is Azad collapsed shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
which is you have to assume the culture knew that that's exactly what would happen. That if they destroyed the game, then the empire would just collapse, and then they don't even have to use military force. They just come in and they probably just do the good old colonial thing where they just offer them stuff, and then
Yeah.
everyone just comes over onto their side.
Which is interesting, though, because the book doesn't say that that's what they're going to do, right? The book just says they're going to let them fall and not do anything. And I think probably in the future that is their plan to
Yeah.
ride in and then offer them the utopia that they can give people.
Yeah.
But that's left out of the story.
See, and the thing is, I don't think it's quite the way I phrased it just then. Like, I don't think the culture actually has interest in colonizing other areas. It's more that the culture is so attractive that all the surrounding areas just eventually decide that they're going to become part of the culture.
Yeah.
And
It,
maybe they're nudged in their decision by these minds who are obviously kind of in the background doing this kind of thing. But then again, maybe it's just like, why not? Why not join this society of, you know, people who are just having fun and drinking wine together all the time?
yeah. Yeah. But what obligation do they have, right? Because like I think you're right. I don't think they're gonna like ride in like the white knights and like offer salvation to all these people that are going to be suffering in the fall of this empire. So like they caused this empire to collapse. People are already suffering under this ruthless government, but in the collapsing of an organized structure, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better for a
Yeah.
while. Um, don't the society have any kind of moral like responsibility to see after these living people? It doesn't
Yeah.
seem like they care about that.
Yeah. I guess I'll just briefly mention something in the other book, which is this idea that like there is something like it's vaguely like the Prime Directive actually. Um, and basically like the idea is there's more there there are other powerful blocks than the culture, although I think the culture is probably one of the more powerful,
Mm-hmm.
and they keep each other in check basically by agreeing not to interfere in certain ways. So I think it would be viewed as a transgression if the culture did just like overtly go in and try to be the white knight. Um, but that doesn't mean they're not going to do it in some form.
Yeah, I mean, it probably would be a transgression if they caused an empire to collapse too, right?
I think it would actually, yeah.
Well,
So
but they didn't do that. They just played a
they
game, and
just played
it's
a
just so
game.
happened that,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
right. Um, all right.
All right,
Final
so
reveal.
it's the end.
Yeah. So we're getting narration. No, not quite the end. There's still me. I know I've been naughty, not revealing my identity, but then maybe you've guessed. And who am I to deprive you of the satisfaction of working it out yourself? Who am I indeed? Yes, I was there all the time. Well, more or less all the time. I watched, I listened, I thought and sensed and waited. And as I did, and did as I was told or asked to maintain the proprieties, I was there all right, in person or in the shape of one of my representatives, my little spies. To be honest, I don't know whether I'd have liked old Gurgeh to have found out the truth or not. Still undecided on that one, I must confess. We, left it to chance in the end. For example, just supposing Chark Hub had told our hero the exact shape of the cavity in the husk that had been Mawhrin-Skel, or Gurgeh had somehow opened that lifeless casing and seen for himself. Would he have thought that little disc-shaped hole a mere coincidence? Or would he have started to suspect? We'll never know. This is a true story. I was there. When I wasn't, and when I didn't know exactly what was going on, inside Gurgeh's mind, for example, I admit I have not hesitated to make it up. But it's still a true story. Would I lie to you? As ever, Sprant Flair Imsaho Wu Hamahandrin Zato Tribiti Mawhrin-Skel.
To
Dun,
answer the
dun,
question,
dun.
would I lie to you? The answer is yes. Like
Yes.
that kind of throws into question everything we just read, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, lies within lies, right? It's
Right.
that's funny.
Yeah, and Sammy points out something that you said to me as well, Matt, that as this part is being read in the audiobook, the voice switches from Fleur, the voice he did for Fleur to the voice he did for Malwyn.
Yeah,
You played that for me a little bit before we started the
yeah,
podcast,
because
and
it was so delightful.
it's
Yeah.
really great.
And
Yeah.
I kind of tried to change my voice as I was reading this here, but I can't even approximate because the Mawhrin-Skel voice is just this amazingly like dangerous sounding like villainous voice with there's so much character to it. The voice actor was really fantastic. I really recommend this audiobook.
Yeah. Arena Venera points out something I was going to talk about, the callback of working out the thing with the birds and the trees. Yeah. Who am I to deprive you the satisfaction of working it out for yourself? Who am I indeed? I love that because like I think it clicked for me in that moment, right? Like you're almost there. Like it's about to tell you who it is, but it gives you that little like solve the puzzle by yourself bit before it reveals it to you, because that's what's like, oh, so the narrator was Fleur, and then you get the second reveal. It's like, oh, not only was the narrator Fleur, but Fleur was Mawhrin.
Yeah,
It's great.
yeah, right. And then I mean, as with many books, it has helped me to go through this process because there was a lot of stuff on the first pass that you just don't get, or it must mean something, but it only becomes clear in retrospect.
Yeah, and I think that the disc-shaped hole we're talking about here is what led you to believe that the secret chip in the game he was playing with the man that saw him cheat.
I think you may be giving me too much credit actually, or maybe that influenced me subconsciously, but that's
Oh, that's what I thought you meant.
I don't know. I don't know what else the disc shaped hole could mean
It
because
was
we
to me it was Fleur. To me, like Fleur was inside the Marwyn shell and then left the Marwyn shell after he left the plate to
guess
go
I
with him.
I guess I don't remember what shape any of these drones actually are.
I
So
mean, Marwyn was small, or Fleur was smaller than Marwyn. I mean, it made a point to point
yeah,
that out. Like it compared them directly, which is like,
that
damn
could
you,
be.
book. Like it was right in front of their
Yeah,
face right there.
yeah, that
So
could be it. But I mean like disc. The word disc is used, and it was a disc playing piece. So
right. That seems specific. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. There's a great debate happening in the chat, or kind of about the ethics of what the culture did here to Azad. I think
Yeah.
it's I don't know if I'm gonna go through it because people are kind of going back and forth about the idea of how justified the culture is and in their various dealings with not only Azad but also like some of the other opponents we know they fought based on other books.
Yeah, and I, like I said, I have not read any other books in this series, but to me, the questions and the conversations that are happening in our chat right now are what you're supposed to have leaving this book,
Yeah,
right? Like you're supposed to be questioning, like, geez, what this is this utopian society. They've achieved everything, every happiness that mankind could ever want, but here's what they have to do, and how are we supposed to feel about that? And I don't feel good about it. I don't feel good about a society that says, okay, we're just going to do some backdoor dealings that manipulates both other people and our own people, use our own people as pawns. Like the final book of this story is like the pawn put aside or something. Like he's literally was just a pawn in their entire game. That's not great. It's definitely not a good thing. Now it's like objectively not as bad as the Empire itself, I think, but it's still not. It doesn't leave me warm and fuzzy either.
yeah, right. A lot depends on this idea that the culture minds actually um, believe in the ethos of the culture, and they've concluded that the best way to protect the culture, the best and perhaps only way to protect the culture, is through these underhanded means. And you have to trust that they're smart enough to make that decision. Otherwise, it's all just like
Yeah,
super AIs babysitting humans who they don't really regard as
yeah.
important.
Sir Grau says in the Discord chat that his understanding is that culture is Banks' actual idea of a utopia, and then he tries to poke as many holes in it as possible. And that's the feeling I got from this book too. And I don't think he was saying implicitly this utopia is actually bad. He was just exploring. Okay, let's say this is utopia. What could go wrong here?
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
like that. I think that's a very interesting thing to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've Scott, I've written some things about like the idea of how would you design a utopia, and
Yeah.
there's also that um, less wrong kind of sequence about like the idea of like all the common pitfalls when thinking through a utopia, that where it's like there are some obvious failure modes and some less obvious failure modes about like what is it actually about human nature that needs to be optimized for. It's fun to think about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's why I said this was a Matt book,
Yep.
because this is absolutely a Matt book. This is a Matt series. I'm not surprised you ran out and read another one either.
Yeah, yeah. Space opera and AIs can't really stop
Yeah,
me.
yeah. All right, guys. Do you have any other questions or comments or anything for us before we wrap this whole thing up? Just anything goes. It says Q&A, but it's not necessarily Q's. It's just comments and
Yeah,
responses.
yeah,
C and R.
yeah. Final wrap up thoughts
Yeah,
that
yeah.
didn't make it into the other slides.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, this was, I said this to Matt earlier today as I was trying to wrap up my preparation for this podcast. Pulling slides for this one is really hard, because my method is like to read through the book, and then as I'm reading through the book, mark sections that I think are interesting. And then once I've finished, go back and reread those sections and then label which ones are like ones that I think are interesting, and in reflection of the story as a whole, something we want to talk about. And I limit myself to 20 of those, and I had like 45 after I finished that process today. So it was like, um, it was tough.
Yeah,
It was tough, and there's parts of this book that I really wanted to talk about that just not time. We were already on 2 hours for this, so
yeah.
I think to me that's the sign of a well-written book. If you have that much you want to say about it.
Yeah, that's what I find happens when we have really thematically rich books where you're like, well, we can't skip over this through line, can't skip over this through line, and it's like,
Right.
well, you can't actually pursue all of the through lines in a book that has like that has this much intricacy to it.
Right. Right. Arena Venera says they were sort of disappointed there was so little about game playing.
Yeah, that's interesting that they go on to say that like getting good at games is a fascinating subject area, and it would be interesting to see the details of how people do it. I mean, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think it's ironic that that's the instinctual response I wanted to have to that comment is, well, that's not what this story is really about. But isn't it though? Because like it's called The Player of Games. It's about a game. It's just not the game we think it is, right?
yeah, right, yeah. Um, Trying to think
Um,
if I would actually think like how would you do that? Because he's already a master, right? So he just kind of does it.
right, right. I mean, to me, it would be a lot of exposition. I mean, I'm sure a writer as skilled as Banks could find a way to make it interesting. But in my head, explaining rules of the game with my limited artistic talent would be, here's how the game works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesse asks, can we think of a better utopia than the culture, or how they could be somehow less manipulative? And says it's pretty difficult for them to not just easily justify everything the culture does. Um, I mean, I think that's what's interesting. Actually, I'm going to sidestep the answer. I think that's what's interesting about Gurgeh as a character is like he's a misfit in the culture, and like I don't know how I would be in the culture, obviously, because it's ridiculous to imagine. But like I don't see myself as someone who would value the hedonistic aspect of it. Like I would like I connect with the part of Gurgeh that's like I want to win, I want to be better than other people. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, that's not a very pro-social thing to say. It's like, yeah, I know, but I'm human, and like we're not great at being pro-social. So like my version of a utopia might involve like a little bit more um struggle, but no suffering, or like minimize suffering, but still make it so that people struggle for things. Because I don't know, I value struggle. I don't value suffering. People shouldn't suffer unless they choose to. Like,
Yeah.
but that's I don't know. That's something something I think about from time to time is the idea that like we get meaning through struggle, and it
Yeah.
seems like nobody in the culture struggles unless they like really go out of their way, and they're sort of encouraged not to. Maybe I'm maybe I'm wrong though, because I've only really read these two culture books.
I mean, I think that's what Gurgeh stands for in Banks's exploration of his utopia. Gurgeh stands for a person that needs that kind of feeling that it does not get it from this utopia.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting that like in his mind a society free from rules and stipulations would inherently become hedonistic. Um,
Yeah.
I, I guess that's probably true, right? I mean, I guess like you think how many things we do or don't do only because society is not okay with that. I mean, I like its exploration of gender. I like how gender is like an immaterial thing in this world because, like, first of all, we understand in our lifetime that gender is a much more complicated thing than we originally thought it was, and now they've just found a way to manipulate it to the point where it's fluid. It's so fluid that you can just change it whenever you feel like.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. I'm not sure I'm in on the whole incest being cool, but they don't really specify how. Like, I assume humans in this society like have children in the same way, but maybe not. So maybe incest is a little different when it's like lab test. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just I don't know about that.
I think he kind of has to take the premise that we've just shattered all of the social restrictions because, like,
Right.
it would come off as a little bit dishonest if you were like, except for the incest taboo. Obviously, we still have that one. Um, it's like, no, this is the culture.
Yeah.
No taboos.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if they built a society that was like you can do whatever you want except this one thing, then the question would immediately be, okay, well, if you can really why what is that one thing? And then you'd have to explore exactly why we've decided that one thing, you know?
Yeah, right.
So,
Um,
that's a good point.
567 says something interesting about how like they were dreading the blackmail for like the whole second half of the book. That's interesting because that goes back to something I've mentioned before, and this didn't have this effect on me in this book, but very often I've mentioned like a book being ruined for me because I was dreading some like other shoe to drop, and then it like either never drops or it was all a red herring, and it's like, yeah, I can totally see that messing with your ability to enjoy a book.
Yeah, to me, it always felt like just a motivating factor to get him off planet. If not like textually within the story, then like metatextually just as a device to get the story moving. So
Yeah.
I was not necessarily worried about it rolling back around.
And I also thought that like his arc was going to be that he realized that that didn't matter. Like there were more important things in the world than his reputation.
Right. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yes. I'm so sorry. God, you guys are saying so many good things. I love
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Just trying to go through them all.
yeah. I mean, so I'm like Jesse's making some comments about like the idea that special circumstances is kind of a release valve for the type of people who do value struggle and don't fit in with the culture. And it's like to me that brings up kind of the wireheading conversation where, um, Scott, have you heard this term wireheading? I guess I can define it just for people who haven't, but like
No, go ahead.
it's kind of the idea that like if tomorrow they came out with like a very quick surgery where you could plug a wire into the pleasure center of your brain and you could just push the button, would you do it? And like stipulate that this gives you like a kind of actual like pleasure that you would actually enjoy. Um, like why not is kind of the philosophical framing for it. Like because you would probably just push it all the time,
Yeah.
right? But because like that's how we're built. We're built to seek pleasure, and if you find a shortcut to pleasure, then we're totally going to be hijacked by that. So like I view a lot of what's going on in the culture as a kind of wireheading in the sense that they can make themselves far too contented and happy far too easily, and thus there's no motivation to ever like do anything that they might consider worthwhile if they were not in that context.
Yeah.
If
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Now we're talking about incest.
just
It's cool.
skip through all this.
Oh, Steven mentioned. Well, Steven asked more culture series episodes. I would like to do that. I think we have to leave that up to the patrons that vote on the books. But I would not be opposed to reading more books in the series. Absolutely not.
One I read was Matter, for anyone who was wondering.
So how did you pick that one? Was it just like random.
I talked to somebody who had been described to me as an expert in the culture books, and I asked them for like a rundown, and they described a very rough outline of what all these books were about and kind of their appeal. And that one had some stuff about it that sounded really interesting to me, and I was like, okay, well, these all sound interesting, but this one is the one that appeals to me the most.
Cool. Matthew talks about the skeleton suit that the general wore as punishment. How cool was that? Yeah, I liked that.
Yeah,
It's kind of similar to a snap drone, right? It's just a
yeah,
thing that follows you around that limits what you can do.
yeah. I like
And
that.
then Kyrgyzstan follows it up with, speaking of that skeleton suit, he likes how the restrictions were lifted by the emperor at the end once they were out of the public eye and appearances didn't have to be maintained. So yeah, it was just another illusion of the level of control they have.
It's great.
It's really cool. Sierragrass says they love Accession, which I'm guessing is a book in the culture series, because it's all about outside context, the outside context problem, which interests me a lot.
Yeah, which is like the only culture book that doesn't have an audiobook?
Is it that one?
It's that one, and that's the one because I knew the details on that one, and that was the one I immediately wanted to read next, but it didn't have an audiobook,
Amen.
so I'll never read it.
Just read it. Just read the words.
I don't think I can anymore.
You read Ward every week. You read like
Yeah, but
10,000 words
that's
of it.
that's different
Why?
because on a computer screen.
Just you can. These are bad excuses. All right, guys. I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap everything up. We'll maybe talk some more after we finish wrapping up. But this thing is going very, very long. So next month, next book. This was, I think, the most contentious vote we've ever had. I think it was tied 3 ways at different times, but in the end, a winner did emerge. And the book we're going to be talking about next month is The Name of the Wind. And I wrote it wrong in the slide. I need you to like proofread these things before we start the
Better.
episode. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. We're going to be doing that book next month. We're tentatively putting it at Friday, December 28th, which is the last Friday of the month. But it's also, we know that's like the time between Christmas and New Year's is a crazy time for everyone, us included. So we might move that. I'm not sure where we're going to move that to yet, but we might move that date. So just if you can follow us on Twitter and check the website, you can see if we decide to move the date.
Yeah. All right.
And we'll mention it in our Discord too if you're there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll give you some warning. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in live. For those listening on the podcast, you should come hang out with us next month. It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. It was great this month. So much interaction. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. Thanks, guys.
I think this has definitely been the most lively chat that
Yeah.
we've ever had, honestly.
And it makes it so much more fun when you guys are talking back and forth, talking to each other, talking to us. I just love it all. This is exactly what I envisioned when we decided to do this thing. So I'm very excited about it.
Me too. So if you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/doofmedia, and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. You get access to our private Discord server, as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover and tons of other cool benefits. Check it out.
That's right. And if you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us and let us know what you think about any of the stuff we cover, you can find us over on Twitter at doofmedia, or you can send us an email at doofmedia@gmail.com. Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun. Let's wrap up 2018 next month with The Name of the Wind, not the wing. And we'll see you all next month. Cool. All right. Let me stop this recording.
Me too.
That was great, guys. Thanks for hanging out. That was so much fun. I enjoyed that a lot.
Y'all added some thoughts that I certainly would not have had otherwise.
Yeah. So one thing I should let you guys know. Some of you are patrons, some of you are not, and that's absolutely fine. But we had like 3 books that were very, very close to each other. We had this, we had Foundation, and then we had the 5th season that were very close. We're going to bring the 2 that lost by like 1 vote back next month to vote in again. So those books are not going away because it was so close. So those are books I think both Matt and I are very interested in as well, along with this one we're doing. So you'll be seeing those again.
Right. Those are all ones where I was like genuinely ambivalent between them. I was like, I would be happy if any of these three won.
Yeah. I re- uh, Name of the Wind is a huge amount of content for one show, though. Oh, great, great.
Is it?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Are you searching?
Uh-huh.
We'll make it work, though.
It says it's 660 pages
It's not too bad.
hardcover, which I don't know if that matters. Yeah.
I honestly don't know. We'll make it work. I'll just limit myself on. Yeah, one of the other things I think we're gonna do, starting. One of the things
Yeah.
one of the other things we're gonna start doing is, if votes starting in 2019, if votes are as close as they were this month, we're gonna do like a runoff vote between books because it gets so close that we're gonna do that.
Weaver Dice will be out this weekend, okay?
It will be out this weekend.
I screwed up and I didn't account for the fact that all of my kids would be sick at the same time all week. So
this was also a crazy busy week for us. Like everything came due at the same time. We had a QA Monday. We had Ward to record Tuesday. I recorded Vow to View on Wednesday. You and I recorded Doofcast last night. And like I've done a podcast or something Doof related every night this week. So it's coming. It's like we've recorded the audio for the episode. It's just putting it all together. And
we recorded the audio for the episode like 2 months ago.
Well, I wasn't going to tell him that part.
Look, I'm trying to get better about this because believe it or not, I want Weaver Dice to be good and to come out frequently.
It's so much fun to do. So yeah, that's one of our main 2019. We're gonna have some Doof New Year's resolutions, and that's one of them.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes, children are.
I hung out with Matt like one time over the summer, and I got deathly ill.
But you didn't get ill the more recent time, did you?
I did not. That's
See?
true.
Doesn't
I
always
escaped.
happen. Yeah.
It doesn't always happen. Well, I built up Matt's children antibodies.
Yeah, you caught the main viruses.
Oh man, I really need a bigger glass of water when I do these long podcasts.
Yeah.
My voice is going.
Mine too.
Yeah, so I think we're probably just gonna wrap it up since I'm quickly not being able to talk anymore.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, everybody. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was so much fun, guys. Like I said, this is exactly what I was hoping this thing would be when we started it a year ago, and it's starting to get there, and I'm very excited about it. So I appreciate you all hanging out. I hope you all had a good time, and I hope you're back next month. Again, like we might move the date, so just follow us on Twitter at Doof Media for announcements regarding that, and we'll see you then.
Bye bye.
How do I click this off? Later, guys.
Later.